Our protagonist and his sister possessed an ability that everyone dreams of: immortality. But little did they know, it wasn't a blessing, it was a curse. For years, they were trapped, forced to endure unimaginable pain, exploited by a guild that called themselves humanity's saviors. But in truth, they were nothing more than monsters, preying on the innocent. They killed our protagonist and his sister over and over again to gain experience, to level up. They saw them as nothing more than tools for their twisted game. Endless pain, endless suffering. But one day the siblings finally found the strength to escape, the fire of vengeance burning in their hearts. And now our protagonist will stop at nothing to expose the truth, to show the world what these imposters really are, to make them pay for the horrors they inflicted. It's time for the world to know the truth. It's time for justice.
A dark fortress stood beneath a crimson sky, its spires piercing the swirling clouds. Dragons circled overhead, foreboding something ominous, signaling the presence of something sinister. Inside, a cloaked figure conjured a fiery orb, its scorching power filling the chamber while warriors lurked in the shadows, preparing for battle. Then, swordsman Seiya Ishiki stepped forward. The battle began. With a sharp breath, he lunged, cutting through the warriors. A whirlwind of blue energy erupted around him, his sword slashing through the ranks with unstoppable force as he made his way toward the demon lord. Just then, he turned around and shouted to his fellow warrior, Chikara Kengo, signaling him to attack. Chikara swiftly struck with a fiery wooden block toward the demon lord, but the demon effortlessly dodged the attack, mocking them before launching a fiery blast in retaliation. At that moment, Aya Sajiri, the guild mage, stepped in, saving the lives of her fellow warriors using an ice shield. The chilling barrier absorbed the scorching flames, just as support member Tora A barged in, exclaiming that even with the shield, both warriors had sustained injuries. Without hesitation, he handed them healing potions. Meanwhile, Haruto then pulled his final move, unleashing his sword's immense energy and striking the demon lord with a devastating attack. Just then, breaking news flashed across the city, announcing that the S-rank Hunter Guild, by Akiran, had finally defeated the Infernal Demon King. Crowds erupted into cheers. News reports stated that it had been about 200 years since Gates and creatures first appeared. The White Lotus, the world's strongest hunter guild, was praised as a group of heroes for defeating the demon lords. The scene shifted to a live broadcast where reporter Sato-san was interviewing the members of Byakuren. The reporter congratulated them, to which Kiro Haruto humbly responded, exclaiming that it was all thanks to the support from people worldwide. Someone from the crowd questioned how they had become so strong despite being just S-rank hunters. Haruto smiled widely and responded that it was through daily training. The scene then transitioned to the guild hall, where the members engaged in lighthearted chatter, joking about their rigorous daily training. However, Haruto, with a sinister smirk, suddenly interjected and exclaimed that it was necessary. He then turned his sharp glare toward the siblings, Kiryu Makoto Shin and Kiryu Minori Shin, who were chained. They captured Makoto and Minori, a pair of immortal siblings, and slaughtered them repeatedly to farm experience points. With a cold expression and a mocking tone, he questioned whether they agreed with his assessment, calling them monsters. After a brief pause, he seemed to reconsider his words, casually remarking that calling them monsters might be too harsh. A laugh escaped his lips as he continued, explaining that, thanks to them, the guild had grown stronger. Without hesitation, Haruto attacked Makoto, stating that he was very grateful. His sword sliced through, brutally cutting one side of Makoto's face. Haruto then declared that cutting plants, animals, or even people didn't yield experience. They must kill creatures to level up. Haruto then explained that there was one exception, the Undying. The other half of Makoto's face reattached itself, and in that moment, Haruto leveled up. A sinister smile crept onto his face as he licked his bloodied sword, exclaiming that if they killed those who revived endlessly, they could level up infinitely, stating that nothing could be easier. His fellow guild members, wearing equally sinister smirks, glared at the Kiryu siblings, ready to attack. They then brutally tortured them with intense rage and overwhelming energy. The hall was soon filled with bloodstains. After an intense session, Haruto smirked, remarking that it was another great training session today. Chikara responded that it was still not enough for him, stating that he needed to get stronger. Meanwhile, the others, exhausted, stated that they were done for the day. Meanwhile, Toru was busy on his laptop, a worried expression on his face. Ishiki noticed and inquired about the issue. Toru explained that he had been struggling to gather the poison data he desired. Ishiki encouraged him to relax, teasing that Toru was such a diligent individual and suggesting he have some fun with the ladies. Toru chuckled and assured Ishiki it was fine. With a wild look, he yanked Minori closer by her hair, declaring she was enough for him. He then proclaimed her his precious doll, casually adding he had already accomplished nearly everything. From the room's other side, Haruto, standing above, observed that the situation had become rather repetitive. He then glared down at Minori with fierce intensity. Haruto came from behind, stating that Toru was wrong. There was one more thing he hadn't done with her. He came closer and whispered in Toru's ear about pregnancy. Toru turned to him, utterly shocked and stunned to hear his words. Then, he laughed maliciously and acknowledged Haruto's genius. Haruto smirked. Toru then explained that all he ever thought about was killing. He had never considered creating a new life. Then, he joyfully shouted to Sajiri, instructing her to hypnotize his little doll. She awkwardly responded in agreement and began preparing to cast a spell on Minori. She cast a lust enchantment spell on her while the helpless Minori pleaded, asking her to stop. Ishiki stepped forward, stating his intention to join as well. Sajiri exclaimed awkwardly about how men were all idiots. Meanwhile, Haruto ordered Sajiri to release the seal on the male monster. She asked for a reason, to which Haruto with a sinister smirk replied that even though Makoto's younger sister was being tormented right in front of him, he was bound by chains and couldn't do anything, making it a spectacular show. Sajiri then broke Makoto's chains. Realizing his chains were broken, he urged to go to his sister. His vision blurred with fury as he saw them closing in on her. His hands trembled as he tried to step forward, screaming at them to stop. Just then, Haruto used his holy lance. Haruto summoned his holy spear. A massive golden spear formed, radiating divine energy. With a swift thrust, it shot forward like a streak of holy light, slamming into Makoto. The force of the attack sent shockwaves through the air, sparks flying as the energy clashed violently against him. Haruto laughed loudly, looking down at Makoto as he lay on the floor helplessly, his body tensed in pain. Blood seeped from his wrists and legs. Haruto declared that he would give Makoto a front seat with his holy magic. Unlike fire or blunt attacks, holy magic actually worked, and since Makoto's regeneration had stopped, it hurt more than usual. Makoto gritted his teeth, yearning in pain, and said he would curse Haruto. But before he could finish his words, Haruto brutally slammed his sword into Makoto's neck, ordering him to be quiet, stating that talking wasn't allowed. He mockingly told Makoto to curse the fact that he was born with that body. His red eyes glowed intensely, radiating an ominous aura. A single tear rolled down his cheek, contrasting with the thin streak of blood dripping from his eye. Haruto sighed, addressing Makoto as undying scum. While they both stood beside Minori's unconscious body, Haruto suggested they leave, mentioning their overseas media appearance that would keep them busy. Toru responded that before leaving, he needed to feed Chimera-chan. Haruto mocked him, calling him the only freak who liked that thing. Toru exclaimed in defense that she was cute. As they made their way out of the room, Toru asked about the monster seal. He then noted that Sajiri would get cranky if they woke her now. Haruto responded that it couldn't break through an iron door and ordered it to be locked. As they locked the room, Makoto writhed in pain and screamed that it hurt and that he couldn't see anything. Just then, Minori approached her brother and took out the sword from his neck. Makoto screamed in pain. Minori closed her eyes and held the sword in her hands as tears rolled down her cheeks. Makoto begged her to stop. Just then, Minori stabbed herself with the sword, screaming about how disgusting it was. She wanted to forget everything, pretend it never happened, and change her whole body. As she pulled the sword out and fell to the ground, blood covered her. She told her brother to end her life. Makoto then remembered Haruto's words from earlier and thought that the Holy Lance could release her. With it, he could free his sister from her suffering. Makoto then stood up and instructed Minori to cut off his arm. Minori stepped forward with a heavy heart and stabbed his arm, but upon hearing Makoto's screams, she exclaimed in fear that she couldn't cut it and apologized. Makoto explained that even with regeneration, the pain remained. An undying one who couldn't die, regenerate, or even lose consciousness was doomed to suffer pain for eternity. He urged her to do it one more time. Minori put her hand over her mouth as she cried, then finally cut off her brother's arm, apologizing as blood splattered all over the floor. They both fell to the ground. Makoto told Minori that she did great. All that was left now was to stab his heart, so he could regenerate. Minori then stabbed his heart, but was utterly in disbelief. Her eyes widened in shock when a radiant yellow energy emerged with a blue aura swirling around the room, and a pop-up showed a level up. Both siblings were in disbelief. Minori questioned the level-ups. Makoto seemed to realize something. Minori suddenly came closer, asking if he knew what she was thinking. He panicked and refused. But it was revealed that Minori wanted her brother to kill her. After seeing her brother panic, she explained, while remembering the guild members' faces, that he wasn't going to kill her. He was going to kill them through her. Suddenly, Minori screamed in intense rage as a red aura swirled around her, signaling extreme anger. She shouted that they were going to get revenge. Meanwhile, Makoto was stunned to see her expression, silently watching. He then agreed. Desperate to survive and fueled by vengeance, the siblings made a brutal choice, killing each other again and again to level up and begin their revenge. Minori informed Makoto about Toru Abe, describing him as a handyman and baggage carrier for the S-rank guild, White Lotus. She further elaborated that his personality was cowardly and quiet. However, those who knew him all shared the same opinion. Recalling a past scene, she mentioned that Toru had once examined the insides of monsters and remarked that the guy seemed somewhat strange. The scene then shifted to 3 years ago, where Toru was seen excitedly examining the ogre's insides, cutting and connecting various organs with meticulous precision. Just then, Haruto arrived, observing Toru's diligence. He then asked Toru if he would like to dissect something even better. Curious, Toru questioned him about what could be better before following him as he left. Later, it was revealed that the innermost room of the guild, usually off-limits, Toru then followed Haruto. The scene then transitioned to a meeting room where all the guild members were gathered. Haruto Kiri addressed them, inquiring whether they all desired glory. The members, puzzled, asked what he meant. Haruto confidently responded that from that moment on, he would show them something meant only for them. The members exchanged uncertain glances, not entirely grasping his words. He continued, explaining that their future would be filled with a glory no human had ever attained, but at the cost of being trapped in darkness from which they could never escape. He then turned slightly, looking at them, and questioned whether they would still come with him. Chikara, along with the other members, responded enthusiastically, declaring that whether it was glory or the abyss, the direction they were heading remained the same. Haruto, pleased, thanked everyone and assured them that he would guide them. He then leaned down and opened a door on the floor, revealing a staircase, explaining that it led to a future filled with glory and expansion. The members, intrigued, descended, murmuring amongst themselves about the hidden room. One noted that he never knew such a secret room existed, while another added that the guild had used it in the past to imprison enemy forces who opposed them. One member hesitantly questioned the notion of imprisonment, to which another replied that even a glorious guild had its dark side. Haruto led them deeper into the room, stopping in front of a locked door that required his fingerprint to access. The members, growing more curious, questioned what exactly he planned to show them. As the door swung open, Haruto introduced the immortal siblings Kiryu Makoto and Kiryu Minori, whom he had captured and imprisoned in this hidden room. The members, upon seeing them, were shocked and enraged. Haruto, however, urged them to remain calm, explaining that although the siblings appeared human, their bloodline was entirely different. He further revealed that they belonged to the Undying Tribe, a race believed to be extinct. With a smug expression, Haruto stepped closer and suddenly slashed one side of Makoto with his sword. The members, intrigued, began questioning the siblings' regeneration and immortality. One member asked whether the Undying Tribe still existed, while another noted that it was certainly surprising. However, one skeptical voice questioned the relevance of it to their glory. Haruto then revealed the level measurement device used when joining the guild, explaining that it assigned ranks based on physical strength and total magic power, which determined their combat abilities. He clarified that the White Lotus Guild required a minimum level of 20, and an A rank was mandatory for entry. The panel then displayed Haruto Kira's level 50. The members were utterly stunned. Normally, leveling up required defeating monsters, which came with great risks, as careless mistakes could lead to death. With an eerie smile, Haruto then stabbed Minori and revealed to the members that by using the siblings, they could easily level up. A notification instantly appeared, signaling a level up. Toru, who had been silent until then, suddenly bowed down. His expression shifted drastically, his face contorting with wild excitement. With a crazed look, he turned to Haruto and declared his approval, exclaiming that it was perfect. Without hesitation, he grabbed Minori, choking her as she lay on the floor. His voice trembled with excitement as he admitted his curiosity about the structure of the human body and its breaking points. Then, with maniacal glee, he brutally began stabbing Minori, maliciously asking how it felt to have her organs ripped apart with a knife. Repeating the gruesome process with both hands, his eyes glowed with obsession, as if mesmerized. A notification popped up again, indicating another level up. Toru burst into laughter, his entire body drenched in blood, reveling in his newfound power. He then removed the cloth from Minori's eyes and, with a twisted smile, told her she was beautiful. His voice dripped with malice as he demanded to know more about her. He then continued his cruel experiments, playing with her body like a deranged scientist, ensuring that she truly couldn't die. He tested poisons, poured chemicals onto her exposed flesh, and casually ripped apart her limbs while smiling. Like a true monster, he wondered aloud about the effects of cutting her brain and how long she could survive if her organs were fed to insects. Meanwhile, the guild members, watching the horrifying scene unfold, initially reacted with shock, but their expressions gradually changed. Ishiki, observing them closely, remarked that the siblings were like monsters who couldn't die. Their faces slowly twisted with sinister smiles, their eyes gleaming with eerie excitement. Then, as if consumed by a shared madness, the members began tormenting the siblings, brutally attacking them and conducting their own twisted experiments. Haruto, watching the spectacle unfold, grinned wickedly, remarking on how easy they were to handle and how helpful this situation was. Now, back in the present at the airport, the guild members were preparing for their overseas media appearance. As they walked, Chikara commented on his surprise about hopping around for the interview. Sajiri, smirking, remarked that those with too much stamina got tired in suits. Annoyed, he told her to shut up. Ishiki glanced back and asked about Toru's whereabouts. Haruto nonchalantly responded that Toru was probably with the dolls, seemingly enjoying his new experiments. Ishiki noted how energetic Toru was. Meanwhile, back at the guild, Toru arrived at the hidden room, giggling and laughing as he greeted Minori. Apologizing for making her lonely, he stepped inside, only to be utterly shocked to see Makoto there. Confused, he questioned what Makoto was doing there. As he watched in horror, he realized that Makoto was killing Minori. Panicked, he screamed for him to stop, warning that the crystallization of their work would be lost. However, his voice faltered when he saw them. When the siblings turned to him with a red aura swirling around them, they appeared so giant that he was speechless. He wondered what had happened because they had both been so skinny the night before. It was then revealed that normally, when someone defeated a creature of equal or lower level than themselves, the experience gained was minimal. However, if they defeated a creature of a higher level, the experience gained increased dramatically. The siblings had been systematically killing captives, raising their levels, and even fighting each other to accelerate their growth. Their levels had skyrocketed, resulting in extreme transformations. Toru fell to the ground, overwhelmed by the shocking revelation. As the siblings approached him with overwhelming power, he panicked, realizing he needed to act fast. Trying to save himself, he stumbled backward and crashed into a pole. Laughing nervously, he warned them not to think they could escape so easily, declaring the hideout as his domain. With trembling hands, he pressed a hidden danger button next to him. The siblings, confused, watched as his monstrous creation, Chimera-chan, emerged. Its blue aura pulsed menacingly, and its radiant red eyes locked onto them. Grinning wildly, Toru sneered, vowing to kill them again so they would never think of escaping. Then, the siblings with intense power stood firmly as Makoto told Minori to let's begin their revenge. Toru pushed his beast toward the siblings as the monstrous chimera stood before them, flames raging around its massive form. Its glowing red eyes burned with fury, and a snake-like head hissed from its shoulder. Makoto muttered in shock, realizing that it was a chimera-fused beast. The air grew heavy as the beast roared, fire surging higher, signaling an imminent battle. Minori, terrified, hid behind a wall. Makoto reassured her and told her to leave this to him. Toru mocked Makoto, questioning if he understood the situation he was in, adding that he could never win no matter what it was 2 against 1. Meanwhile, Makoto stood casually in front of the beast, calmly asking it to settle down. However, the beast raged with intense, fiery energy. Toru spoke to his beast, stating that Makoto was just food that regenerated, and he would make sure to feed it plenty. Confidently standing beside his beast, Toru exclaimed that, in the end, the two of them were nothing but food. He told them to stay chained up and quietly offer their experience points. Then, he clung to the wall where Minori was hiding and laughed maniacally, adding that it might be fun to let Chimera-chan have some fun with her. He wondered aloud what the child of a chimera and an undying tribe member would be like. Minori trembled, terror washing over her face. Makoto pressed his hand against the wall, his eyes filled with anger and a bloody intensity. He declared that he would kill Toru. Toru shouted and mocked him, telling him to try, saying he was nothing more than a worthless prey. As the beast roared angrily, it charged toward Makoto with immense speed and power, its paws damaging the floor and smashing into the wall. Makoto was shocked by the unexpected speed and strength, gritting his teeth in frustration. Just then, he sensed something and looked to the side. It was Toru's hand, swirling with a blue aura, holding a knife as he attacked. Makoto dodged the attack, surprised to see that Toru was using some magic skill to separate his hand from his body. It was revealed that when leveling up, individuals could sometimes gain special skills. The content varied depending on profession, experience, race, and other factors. Toru Abe's profession was known as an errand boy, allowing him to do various jobs. Because of this, he was given that name. He had mastered multiple skills: pharmacist, beast tamer, and assassin. His unique skill was the ability to generate a warp portal connecting different spaces. Not only could he take items in and out, but he could also use them for assassination, making it a rare skill. With combat strength capable of defeating the Demon King, he possessed power worthy of joining an S-rank guild. Meanwhile, the battle between the beast and Makoto intensified. Eventually, Makoto was taken down by Toru's beast. Toru laughed as he enjoyed the bloody sight of the battle, pointing out that even if Makoto leveled up, he was nothing more than a weakling with a regeneration skill. Mockingly, he stated that Makoto was nothing but food for leveling up. Minori, still hiding behind the wall, worried about her brother. Despite his body being torn apart, Makoto still stood up. Toru was shocked by this and asked Chimera-chan if it was impossible with just this level. He then commanded his beast to eat Makoto. The beast roared, its eyes burning with intense energy, and locked onto its target. It lunged at Makoto, devouring him. Toru declared that, no matter how much he tried to regenerate, he could not escape Chimera-chan's power. However, Toru was stunned when Chimera-chan suddenly threw up Makoto and then collapsed onto the floor, vomiting a green liquid, probably poison. Concerned, Toru rushed toward his beast, wondering what had happened. Meanwhile, Makoto regenerated and stood up, telling Toru that he had been instinctively avoiding it, but there was no need for that now. Toru turned around, shocked to see Makoto regenerating. In anger, he rushed toward him, shouting that Makoto had killed Chimera-chan. Swiftly, he attacked, telling him to die. Makoto tried to stop him, warning him that he was the one who was going to die. Toru was startled by these words and instinctively stepped back. He then noticed a green liquid dripping from his hand and exclaimed that it was burning. It was revealed to be a skill called poisoning, a technique that turned the target into deadly poison. Makoto explained to Toru that, in this case, it was his own blood and flesh. Toru was stunned by this revelation, wondering how Makoto could gain a skill beyond regeneration. It was supposed to be impossible, as one could not acquire anything beyond their innate skills without specific training for their race. Makoto smirked, questioning if this wasn't the result of Toru repeatedly poisoning him. With a chilling expression, Makoto stabbed his own wrist with a knife, ripping apart his arm, mocking Toru by telling him to take his poison back. Then, he delivered a powerful punch, leaving Toru bruised all over. With an enraged expression, Makoto asked who had stolen away the peaceful life they once had. He demanded to know if Toru had stopped when they screamed for him to stop. Or if it were just him. Makoto clenched his fist, filled with immense energy, and furiously attacked Toru, smashing him into the floor. With a voice full of wrath, he demanded to know what Toru had done to his sister, Minori. The impact of the attack was so powerful that the floor cracked. Makoto then used his regeneration skill on Toru's wounds, healing him. Toru was horrified and asked why Makoto did this. With a furious look in his rage-filled eyes, Makoto responded that this level of injury would not calm his anger. Mockingly, he reminded Toru of the question he had asked earlier, recalling his previous words. With a smirk, Makoto taunted him, questioning how it felt to have his organs shredded with a knife. With a smirk, Makoto then stabbed Toru with his knife. Using his skills, he declared that this was karma. He would teach Toru the meaning of that word with his own body. The scene then shifted to the guild members. They were returning, wondering if Toru was still with the dolls. Ishiki laughed, remarking that Toru was probably taking some data. Haruto asked Sia to go and get Toru, adding that they should celebrate defeating the Demon King since enough time had passed. Ishiki made his way toward the room, calling for Toru. However, he was shocked by the scene before him upon reaching the room. The walls were cracked, blood was splattered all over, and Toru's beast lay lifeless on the floor. He wondered what had happened and called out to Toru. Rushing into the next room, Ishiki was met with a horrifying sight. Toru was hanging in the worst possible condition. His body was burning from poison, blood dripping down. Ishiki stood frozen, utterly shocked by Toru's situation. Minori now introduces Konga Chikara, an S-rank martial artist and the strongest wielder of power in Byakuren. He is said to be a man of deep emotions who would risk his life for his comrades, but those closest to him know the unfathomable nature of his malice. Meanwhile, as he walked through the hall, one boy praised him and exclaimed his desire to have a body as strong as Konga's someday. Another responded, dismissing the idea, stating that no matter how much he trained, he could never be like Konga Chikara. Chikara stopped in his tracks, placed his hand on the man's shoulder, and acknowledged that it was true effort did not always bear fruit easily. He added that his own body could never have been obtained without effort. Encouraging them, he told them to keep at it. The boys, startled by his presence, watched as he left, their admiration growing. They chattered in amazement, speaking of how he was already over level 300. On his way out, Chikara gritted his teeth, recalling his own words. The scene then shifted to a year ago, where Minori and Makoto lay on the floor, wounded and covered in blood. Chikara swept Makoto under his foot and coldly remarked that if the effort had clear and visible results, it would be a different matter. Without hesitation, he kicked Makoto and brutally smashed him under his foot, declaring that there was no better training method than this. The panel displayed a notification of a level up. Grabbing Minori by her head, he laughed, mocking the ease of getting stronger simply by killing defenseless monsters. He then smashed her hard onto the floor. After tormenting the siblings, he spread his arms with pride, sighing that leveling up had been taking longer lately. Concluding that it was inevitable at his level, he turned back to Makoto, expressing his frustration. If Makoto did not react at all, it made things boring. Makoto, his face fully burned, listened in silence. As he healed, he clenched his fists, realizing that he had no choice but to make Chikara scream instead. Gathering all his strength, he punched Chikara with his full power. Chikara exhaled in satisfaction, counting aloud that it made 200 ribs broken for the day. Stretching his hands, he sighed and demanded that they try harder and scream more. Turning to Minori, he attacked her with his leg, ordering her to scream with a good voice as he smashed her harder with his foot. Minori, unable to bear the pain, let out a louder scream. Pleased, Chikara turned to Makoto, suggesting they add 100 more for his little sister. With sinister eyes, he demanded to be entertained. The scene then shifted back to the present, where Chikara and the boys were exercising in the gym. Ishiki arrived, informing Chikara about the situation. With other members, Chikara reached the room, only to be shocked by the chaos inside. Haruto questioned Ishiki about the siblings, causing Ishiki to panic. He hastily responded that he knew nothing, explaining that by the time he arrived, they were already gone. He then warned Haruto that if the world found out about them, it would be disastrous. Meanwhile, Chikara, in a panic, began shouting at Toru, begging him to stay with him. His eyes then caught sight of Toru's laptop. As he examined it, he discovered a video of Makoto beating Toru. Panic set in as he watched closely, horror overtaking him as he realized the extent of the torture Toru had endured. In a fit of rage, he smashed his fist into the floor, vowing to kill them. Haruto, gripping his sword, remained silent, his expression unreadable. The members, confused and panicked by his behavior, watched as he suddenly slammed Toru's head with his sword. Chikara, unable to bear it, visibly furious, grabbed Haruto by his collar and demanded an explanation, insisting that Toru would not make it anymore. Haruto, however, remained firm, arguing that even if they kept Toru alive, it would only prolong his suffering. Ishiki stepped in, attempting to make Chikara understand that Haruto was right. In Toru's current state, he wouldn't have lasted long. Sajiri also tried to calm Chikara, who was visibly frustrated, explaining that Toru had been so brutally tortured that even magic wouldn't have healed him. Despite their reasoning, Chikara couldn't process the shock. Falling to his knees, tears rolled down his cheeks as he smashed the floor, crying out in agony and swearing vengeance. Haruto remained silent throughout the ordeal. Ishiki, noticing his strange behavior, called out to him. However, Haruto seemed visibly shaken. Placing a hand on his right shoulder, he appeared to have realized something. Ishiki, worried, called out again. Haruto, this time, responded with a smile, asking what was wrong. Ishiki, taken aback, quickly responded that it was nothing. Sajiri then addressed the members, stating that they needed to inform everyone of Toru's passing away, that the hero who had saved the world was gone. Haruto agreed. When the members asked if they should hold a funeral first, Haruto refused, seeming to plot something. He then ordered them to prepare a live broadcast. Meanwhile, the siblings were running through the forest. Minori stumbled, getting stuck and falling. Makoto screamed, frantically looking for her. Minori, weak, admitted that her legs couldn't move. Makoto reassured her, telling her that she didn't have to force herself to stand and should rest for a while. They took shelter under a tree. Makoto, exhaling, expressed his relief that they had escaped. Minori agreed, marveling at the fact that they had truly escaped from that hell. Makoto, determined, assured her that he would protect her this time. Minori yawned, exhaustion overtaking her as she drifted into sleep. Makoto, however, remained alert. He knew that those men could come after them at any time, so he needed to stay on guard. Despite his efforts, sleep crept up on him as well. Just then, the sound of footsteps reached his ears. Jolting awake, Makoto recognized the unmistakable presence of Malice. Believing Minori would be safer where she was, he left her there and ran toward the source of the presence. In the middle of the forest, he discovered a house. He wondered if it was coming from there. Just as he was about to approach, a man from behind suddenly stabbed him in the neck with a knife. Makoto collapsed, his body hitting the ground hard. The revelation came too late, for people were surrounding him, all targeting him. Makoto, visibly angry, demanded to know who the hell they were. The thugs surrounded Makoto, ready to attack. One of them wondered if this was the guy they were after. Another commented that there was no woman with him, but someone else pointed out that kidnapping one person for 500 million was an easy job. The girl beside him agreed and told him to finish this quickly. She then stepped forward and cast a strength enhancement spell using her wand. A yellowish energy spread out to the other members, making them significantly more powerful. A big guy stepped forward to attack Makoto, swiftly swinging his wooden stick, exclaiming how easy this would be. However, Makoto casually fixed his jaw and head, leaving the others in shock. The mage girl expressed her disbelief, certain that he should have been dead just now. Makoto, cracking his neck nonchalantly, questioned the gang members, asking if they were their subordinates. The men remained silent. He then remarked that it did not matter to him who they were and immediately attacked the guy with blonde hair, brutally smashing him into the floor. The other members were utterly shocked. After knocking out the big guy, Makoto turned to the remaining members and stated that anyone who directed malice toward him was an enemy. His eyes glowed red with intense anger as he spoke. The members stepped forward, launching an attack on Makoto and managing to cut his arm. One of them smirked, believing they had the upper hand. However, Makoto swiftly used his skill, retaliating by striking the same guy back with his own arm, effortlessly knocking both of them down. The mage girl, now frightened after witnessing the scene, hesitated. Makoto then turned his gaze towards her and remarked that she was the only one left now. The girl, determined, cast a powerful purple lightning spell, creating an intense purple aura around her. She attacked using her wand, confident that no matter how fast Makoto was, he could not avoid the thunder strike. However, as the smoke cleared, her smile faded. Makoto was still standing, completely unfazed by the intense strike. She stared at him in disbelief, questioning who he really was. Determined to finish him, she began preparing an even more powerful spell and attacked once more. But again, Makoto emerged unscathed, casually stepping forward as if nothing had happened. Now visibly terrified, the girl turned and started running, desperate to save herself. But Makoto declared that he would not let her escape. He then captured all 4 of them and hung them from a tree. Changing into one of the members' clothes, which fit him perfectly, he informed them that he had spared their lives, so they should consider themselves lucky. With that, he left. Makoto arrived at Minori, who was still sleeping. As he approached, she woke up. He apologized, asking if he had disturbed her, but she reassured him that she was fine. Noticing his outfit, she curiously asked where he had gotten those clothes. He smiled and replied that a kind person had given them to him. Excitedly, he then revealed that he had also brought clothes for her, which made Minori eager. He told her to change so they could move ahead. After changing, the siblings continued their journey. As they walked, Makoto thought that if they went a little further, their pursuers would not be able to find them right away. Soon, they reached a waterfall. Makoto suggested that they rest there for a while. The siblings lit a fire, and Makoto opened his luggage, which he had taken from the gang members earlier. Minori, upon seeing the snacks inside, screamed happily. Makoto told her that she could eat them, though he noted that there was only a little. Minori ate the snacks and thanked him. Meanwhile, Makoto observed that the attackers had only carried weapons and emergency rations, offering no useful information. Determined to gather more intelligence, Makoto decided to leave for town. He informed Minori that he also needed to get food supplies and instructed her to stay hidden. Minori nodded in agreement. The scene then shifted to the city. Upon arriving at the market, Makoto was shocked and surprised by the things he saw. He sold the weapons he had taken, marveling at the unexpected high value they fetched. Entering a mart, he considered that with this money, he would be able to feed Minori properly. After finishing his shopping, he sighed, wondering what his next move should be. He knew that Abe Tora had only been cannon fodder among their enemies, but the real threats were still out there. He needed to uncover their weaknesses to bring them down. Just then, something on a public broadcast caught his eye, leaving him utterly shocked. A news report was airing about the deceased S-rank hunter, Byakuren member Abe Tora. Haruto, speaking in the broadcast, shared that Tora had been an important comrade who had wisely supported them. He declared that Tora had been cruelly tortured and killed, vowing that they would never forgive those responsible. The public began chattering about the incident. The crowd raised slogans, chanting in support of Byakuren. Then Makoto and Minori's photos appeared on the screen. Their names, Kiryu Minori and Kiryu Makoto, were announced as the ones responsible for killing Tora. Makoto, watching the broadcast, realized the truth. This was why those people had attacked him earlier. Haruto, his eyes filled with tears and rage, shouted aggressively, asking if they were watching. He vowed that no matter where they were, Byakuren would not let them escape and that they would surely face the consequences. The crowd roared in agreement, cheering for the organization and vowing to cooperate in finding those responsible. They declared that they would never forgive the ones who had killed their hero. Makoto processed the situation and came to a realization. So, they planned to continue hiding their crimes. If that was their decision, then he would respond accordingly. His expression darkened with fury. With fiery red eyes and intense anger, he swore that he would definitely drag them down. A few days after the Kiryu siblings' escape, the guild members gathered in the meeting room. Chikara was relentlessly beating a subordinate, demanding why he couldn't bring back at least one decent piece of information. He exclaimed in frustration, questioning if that was too much to ask. Sajiri suddenly slammed the table, grabbing Chikara's attention. She firmly stated that they had leveled up enough already, implying that perhaps they no longer needed to pursue the information. Ishiki, visibly worried, hesitated before voicing his concern. If what they had done to the siblings got exposed to the world, the consequences could be dire. Haruto, noticing Ishiki's distress, tapped him on the shoulder and reassured him not to worry. This small gesture lifted Ishiki's mood, and he managed a faint smile. Haruto then explained that, to prevent exposure, they had ensured that the world perceived the Kiryu siblings as heinous criminals. Just then, the screen displayed breaking news. S-Class Guild Byakuren member Abe Tora had been killed. The screen showed the photos of the Kiryu siblings, labeling them as murderers, and declared a bounty of 500 million yen for their capture. Haruto pointed out that no one would believe the words of criminals. Chikara got furious, turned to Haruto, and shouted, demanding if he was suggesting that they should simply let the siblings go after what they had done to Tora. Haruto calmly responded that it was not what he meant. However, Chikara clenched his fists in rage, his voice rising as he declared that the siblings had tortured Tora, their comrade, and that he would never forgive those responsible. Tears streamed down his face, his eyes burning with wrath. Grinding his teeth, he vowed to capture the culprits and make them suffer more than anything they had ever experienced before. Sajiri nodded in understanding, acknowledging Chikara's pain. She added that Tora had been the weakest among them, which was why he had been targeted. However, Chikara's fury only intensified at her words. In a flash, he launched a devastating punch at her, warning her not to speak ill of Tora. Sajiri, unfazed, swiftly used her powers to restrain Chikara in chains. She told him to calm down, exclaiming that she didn't believe the siblings posed any real threat to them. Still seething, Chikara retorted that it wasn't about them being a threat. Haruto, smiling, stepped in, trying to diffuse the tension. He reminded them of the blood-written message Makoto had left on the wall, stating that he would definitely take his revenge. That meant the siblings were still targeting them. Haruto reassured the guild members that there was no need to panic, as the siblings would undoubtedly appear before them. Besides, the whole world was now on their side. As the news spread across the city, the public became aware of the Kiryu siblings' names and faces, and with the bounty set, information about their whereabouts would surface the moment they were spotted. Chikara, though still frustrated, begrudgingly acknowledged that Haruto had a point. However, before he could voice his thoughts, Haruto cut in, stating that panicking wouldn't help. He reminded them that they were the world's heroes and that they still needed to prepare for future battles against other demon lords. Turning to the group, he announced that they should call it a day, as everyone was exhausted from the past few days. He urged them to rest up so they could resume their efforts with renewed energy. Yet, even as the meeting ended, Chikara remained unable to bear the loss of his friend. Sighing in rage, he vowed not to forgive the siblings and swore to find them. Meanwhile, at the siblings' hideout, they awoke after a restful sleep. Minori laughed, remarking that illusion magic was truly amazing. She had slept peacefully without any nightmares. Makoto, relieved, said he was glad to hear that and added that, now that they had rested well, it was time to move. He explained that staying in the same place for too long would eventually lead to their capture. Minori, worried, pointed out that they were wanted criminals and that their faces were widely recognized. If they were caught, Makoto interrupted, assuring her that there was no need to worry since he had found something useful. He reached into his bag and pulled out a face mask, explaining that as long as they wore these, their faces would be hidden without obstructing their vision. As the siblings donned the masks, Minori exclaimed that this might actually work. With these, even if they encountered enemies, they would remain unrecognized. Makoto then instructed her to get moving. Minori hesitated for a moment before asking her brother if they had a destination. Makoto confirmed that they did. He explained that they were heading for a dungeon, a realm separate from the real world, hidden behind a gate where the laws of reality did not apply. It was a place where ordinary people were not even allowed to step foot. As they journeyed towards the dungeon, Makoto elaborated that the dungeon's terrain was complex and maze-like, making it the perfect place to hide. Pointing ahead, he mentioned that, according to the dungeon guide they had bought in town, there was a poison swamp dungeon at the top of the mountain. Because it was classified as a danger zone, hunters rarely ventured inside. He concluded that they would use it as their base. Upon reaching the dungeon's entrance, the siblings stood before the swirling gate, surrounded by a purple aura. Makoto reassured Minori that no matter what happened, he would be with her. Nodding in agreement, Minori took his hand. Together, they leaped into the other realm. Arriving inside, Makoto observed their surroundings and noted that everywhere they looked, there was nothing but poison. He added that if it weren't for them, no one else would be able to enter. Pushing Minori back slightly, he reminded her that just because there weren't many hunters coming in, they couldn't afford to let their guard down. If someone possessed poison immunity magic, they could easily catch up to them. As he stepped forward, Makoto unknowingly triggered a trap. The moment he stepped on a vine, a flower opened and shot something at him. Makoto quickly informed Minori that stepping on the vines would cause them to shoot seeds, proving that additional dangers were lurking within. Minori, visibly scared, admitted that they truly couldn't afford to let their guard down. She then pointed at something in the distance, asking Makoto what it was. The sight before them revealed two giant beasts looking in their direction. Makoto instructed Minori to leave them to him and reassured her not to worry. As she hid behind her brother, the black beast roared and lunged at Makoto. He swiftly countered, using his skills, launching an attack that proved effective. However, just then, the white beast struck him. Minori gasped in shock, terror evident in her eyes. But Makoto quickly regenerated from the attack, his mind racing. He acknowledged that this dungeon monster's speed and power were on another level, even surpassing Abe and Chimera. Clenching his teeth, he realized that the beast was far stronger than he had expected. Minori, unable to bear watching, attempted to help. She hurriedly prepared a magical circle and cast a spell, sending yellow energy swirling around Makoto. He was surprised, wondering if this was enhancement magic. As the energy surged through him, he suddenly felt his fallen arm moving again. Testing his newfound power, he commanded his arm to move, and it obeyed. Realizing that Minori's enhancement magic had triggered something within him, he launched an attack on the beast with intense red energy swirling around his fists. The attack successfully knocks the beast down. Minori rushed to his side, asking if he was okay. Sighing, Makoto responded that he was just a little tired. Glancing at his severed arm on the ground, he pieced together what had happened. He recognized that his ability to manipulate his body had manifested, likely due to Minori's enhancement magic. As his arm regenerated and reattached itself, he felt an immense surge of power within him. Smirking, he acknowledged that this ability would prove to be incredibly useful. 1 month after the siblings had escaped, Chikara, along with his men, was practicing and engaging in a fierce battle against monstrous creatures. Casually knocking them down one by one, he leveled up effortlessly. The men, watching in awe, were impressed. One of them commented that, as expected of Chikara, he was taking down a wyvern as if it were nothing. Brutally and effortlessly, Chikara slaughtered the monsters, leaving his subordinates astounded. They exclaimed that there was no way they could pull off such a feat as they finally sat down after the heated battle. Chikara furiously demanded where the hell those damn siblings were hiding. One of the men responded calmly, telling him there was no need to rush, as word was that bounty hunters were scouring every corner, desperate to find them. Another reassured him, saying they would be caught in no time. Just then, another man spoke up, his voice carrying intrigue. He mentioned that he had heard something from a friend about a masked man. He then explained the details, saying that a few days ago, a friend of his had gone to clear the poison swamp dungeon and had witnessed something unbelievable. Apparently, someone had taken down a poison snake with their bare hands. Chikara's eyes narrowed as he questioned if it was really a poison snake. The man nodded and elaborated that the creature was an A-rank monster, its venom so potent that it could kill a mountain elephant instantly. Another one of the men added that he couldn't imagine anyone besides Chikara or Kengo taking one down alone. However, Chikara remained unfazed, remarking that the world was vast, and it wouldn't be surprising if there were powerful warriors they had never heard of. But curiosity flickered in his expression. He was intrigued by the individual who had slain the poison snake with their bare hands. He then inquired when this had happened. The man replied that it had been 3 days ago. Chikara's eyes gleamed with intensity as he realized there was a chance they were still in the dungeon. His subordinates were taken aback, and one of them hesitantly voiced his concern, reminding Chikara that the poison swamp was a restricted zone and that they really shouldn't be going there. Before he could finish, Chikara's fist ignited with flames, and without hesitation, he threw a brutal punch at the man's face, sending him crashing backward. With a menacing growl, he asked if he had heard him right before declaring that they were heading to Poison Swamp immediately and ordering them to get ready. A sinister smirk spread across his face as he wondered about the masked man. Meanwhile, inside the dungeon, Makoto suddenly sensed something was off. Minori, noticing his unease, asked what was wrong. Without answering, Makoto swiftly leaped onto a tree, scanning the area. As his gaze landed on the gate, realization dawned upon him. He muttered that it was Kengo. Minori's face paled with fear. Makoto jumped down from the tree, adjusting his mask, and declared that he was going. Panic flashed in Minori's eyes as she urged him to stay with her. He placed a reassuring hand on her head, telling her to calm down and that they had gotten stronger, too. This was their chance for revenge. Despite her worry, Makoto smiled gently and told her not to make that worried face, assuring her that not dying was his specialty, after all. As he prepared to leave, Minori's voice trembled as she warned him to be careful, saying that Kengo was a whole different monster compared to Abe Tora. She then cast an enchantment spell, strengthening Makoto with a power enhancement buff before he disappeared into the shadows. Makoto activated his vision enhancement spell, observing Kengo's movements. He spotted him entering the realm through the dungeon gate and quickly hid behind a tree. He reasoned that if Kengo was near the entrance, there was a high chance he would escape outside, so he needed to move a little further away. His sharp eyes caught sight of a venomous pig nearby. A plan formed in his mind as he decided to use it. Without hesitation, he cut the tip of his finger and stabbed the bloodstained knife into the pig, activating his hypnosis and hallucination skills. For a few minutes, this ability would allow the user to manipulate the target's perception, creating illusions at will. Additionally, it enabled partial absorption of the target's body. Commanding the hypnotized pigs, he sent them charging toward the front of the enemy pack. One of Kengo's men immediately noticed and pointed at the approaching pigs, alerting Kengo. Kengo smirked as the pigs charged toward them, remarking that they were perfect for a warm-up. Mocking his men, he ordered them to quit shaking and charge. As the battle began, Kengo and his group swiftly took down the pigs. Mocking Makoto, Kengo sneered, asking if that was all he had got before signaling for his men to move forward. One of the men hesitated and voiced his concern, suggesting they take a little break. Kengo's expression darkened as he turned sharply, his voice laced with ridicule, questioning what kind of weak-ass nonsense he was spouting. The man hesitated before muttering that it just fell off, mentioning that his breathing was becoming labored. Just then, blood trickled down his face like crimson tears. One by one, the men began coughing violently, hacking up blood. Someone gasped, questioning what was happening. Chikara's eyes widened as he covered his nose and mouth, muttering in shock that this smell was poison. But he was confused, as poison boars didn't release this kind of stench, even when they died. He wondered what the hell was happening. Before he could think further, a shadow moved in a flash. Makoto launched a sudden attack from behind, his blade aiming for Kengo. Kengo instantly recognized him and stated that he was the masked man from the rumors. Makoto's knife struck Kengo's hand, but before it could pierce deeper, Kengo Chikara caught the blade in midair, stopping the attack. Makoto swiftly stepped back, watching as Kengo calmly pulled the knife from his own hand. Observing Makoto's movements and endurance, Kengo's lips curled into a smirk. Just as the rumors said, he was pretty damn strong. A twisted, sinister grin stretched across his face as he pointed at Makoto, declaring that he liked him. Makoto's eyes widened in shock. Kengo continued, saying that he liked strong guys. Then, his expression darkened with contempt as he stated that, on the other hand, weaklings disgusted him to no end. Gesturing towards his fallen subordinates, he sneered that those guys had died because they were weak. Then, with an eerie glint in his eyes, Kengo extended his hand toward Makoto, declaring that he could tell just by feeling it that Makoto was strong. His voice dripped with excitement as he offered Makoto a proposition to join him. Chikara asked if Makoto would like to become his companion. He further explained that if he became his subordinate under the name of Byakuren, he would gain money, honor, and women, adding that everything would be his. With a smile, he asked what he thought, insisting that it was a great offer. Makoto remained silent. Chikara then commented that, as he had said earlier, he liked strong people. Crushing the man's hand, he stated that he absolutely hated weaklings. Mocking him, he admitted that he had thought the man had some potential, but he guessed not. Without hesitation, he then crushed the man brutally, stating that watching them was so irritating. If that was the case, he should have just used them as punching bags. After listening to him, Makoto's eyes turned red as he recalled the torture he and his sister had endured. Clenching his fists, he asked Chikara why he tormented the weak like that. Chikara excitedly shouted that he did it because it was fun. He explained that when he punched the weaklings, they all reacted the same way, with a hopeless look on their faces, apologizing and begging for help. He exclaimed that they all said the same things, and with a sinister grin, he stated that their faces scrunched up in fear. Throwing his arms wide, his head tilted back as he burst into crazed laughter. He then jumped on the man's body, crushing him brutally. He declared that their faces, stained with despair from that moment, were just so damn fun to witness. Makoto, using his skills swiftly, attacked and threw an intense punch at Chikara. Chikara dodged the attack and complimented him, stating that as men, they needed to fight first. The battle began. Chikara commented that he had not planned on letting him go, but he was really strong. Makoto thought to himself that he knew it. Chikara was truly a monster. In a flash, with intense power and rage, Chikara attacked him, throwing a crushing blow so powerful and intense that Makoto was taken aback. He wondered if this was the heaviest attack he had ever taken and questioned whether Chikara had not shown his true strength against them before. Chikara exclaimed that Makoto had been able to withstand that strike. Laughing, he stated that, as expected, he must have held back too much. He had only used 30% of his power. Makoto realized, after that attack, that it had not been Chikara's full power. Chikara then mocked him for using a weapon, telling him to use it all he wanted. With a sinister grin and a fiery aura swirling around him, Chikara commented that he would take every attack Makoto threw and show him who was stronger. Makoto then stepped into attack, but his weapon did not do much. Chikara questioned him, pointing out that he had not maintained his weapon. He stated that with a dull blade like that, he would not even scratch him when using his full strength. Chikara came at him again, his fiery aura intensifying with immense power. He told Makoto that, by now, he should understand the difference in power, and added that he could not defeat him, not like this. Makoto, furious, demanded that he shut up and attacked. Meanwhile, Chikara, using only one hand, easily dodged his attack. He told him that he was not the first one to be this defiant after seeing his strength. Taking a step back, he then punched Makoto with full energy. Laughing like a crazed psychopath, he exclaimed that he liked him more and more before brutally attacking him, knocking him out. He admitted that he had gotten too excited and pushed him down, stating that what was done, though he had high expectations. Just then, Chikara turned back and noticed a knife stabbed into his shoulder. He pulled out the blade and threw it aside, realizing that this was bad. It was poisoned. As he saw Makoto behind him, he questioned in disbelief how it was possible. After having his organs destroyed like that, and yet his skin was not even rotting after soaking in the poison swamp? He was surprised and muttered that Makoto was so inhuman. Wondering if it could be, he suddenly realized something. Chikara prepared to attack, a yellow energy surrounding him. He tried to strike Makoto, and an intense battle began. As Chikara attempted to remove Makoto's mask, he used his full energy and immense power, slamming the ground with such force that everything shattered. After the massive explosion, Makoto's mask fell off. Chikara laughed maniacally, his eyes dark with a deadly look, and with a sinister grin, he exclaimed that it was Makoto after all. Finally, he had found him. He realized that it had been Makoto all along. Crossing his arms, he declared that he could not believe the man in the mask had been him all along. He then exclaimed that the reason Makoto had withstood his attacks was not due to his durability, but because of his regeneration. With intense anger, he pointed a finger at him, stating that he had been chasing him all this time. He was the one who had killed Abe Tora. Chikara had been dreaming of taking revenge on him. Clenching his fists in rage, he declared that there was no talk of making Makoto his ally. With a deadly and aggressive look, he stated that he would kill him. Makoto responded, questioning him. Kill him? Was that all he was satisfied with? His eyes glowed with fiery energy as sparks crackled around him. With a serious attitude, he pointed at Chikara, declaring that he would not just kill him. The battle began with Chikara launching an intense attack against Makoto, his energy surging with overwhelming power. Using his abilities, he hurled sharp stones that cut deep into Makoto's arms. In a flash, he leaped forward once again, determined to strike, declaring that Makoto was not going to escape. With all his might, Chikara slammed him forcefully into the ground, causing a massive explosion upon impact. However, in retaliation, Makoto swiftly counterattacked, unleashing his full power. He threw a ferocious punch, but Chikara remained unmoved, standing still as a sinister laugh escaped his lips. Mocking Makoto, He questioned if that was all he had. Without hesitation, he retaliated with an immensely powerful punch, brutally hitting Makoto and demonstrating what a true strike looked like. As the blow landed with devastating force, he paused and took note of Makoto's trembling form. A crazed laugh erupted from him as realization dawned upon him. Observing Makoto's state, Chikara coldly remarked that fear, once engraved into the body, did not vanish so easily. Makoto lay on the ground, wounded and struggling to rise. Blood dripped from his side. His expression was contorted in pain as he desperately tried to lift himself. In the distance, Chikara watched him with a smug stance, his satisfaction evident. His face, when shown up close, displayed a menacingly wide grin, while Makoto's reflected terror, his eyes wide with fear, sweat trickling down his face. Chikara loomed over him, questioning if he still remembered the fear of being tortured by him. As he stepped forward, closing in, Makoto continued to struggle to rise. Just then, behind Chikara, Makoto's arms swirled with a red aura. With a commanding voice, Makoto ordered an attack. His arm lunged toward Chikara from behind, but the latter easily dodged it. Shouting, he accused Makoto of attempting to trick him, his voice filled with mockery. Seeing Makoto's terrified reaction, Chikara sneered and stepped closer, questioning whether Makoto had truly believed he could take him down with such an attack. Without hesitation, he delivered a powerful kick that sent Makoto crashing to the ground. Gazing down at his battered opponent, Chikara inquired how Makoto had managed to become so strong in such a short time. Without waiting for an answer, he slammed his foot onto Makoto's body, eliciting a scream of agony. Clenching his fist, he mused aloud that he would simply keep hitting him until he answered. Then, as if piecing something together, he remarked that Makoto's presence there could only mean that his sister was nearby. Makoto's eyes widened in shock and fear as the memories of the torment Chikara had inflicted upon them resurfaced. His jaw tightened, his teeth gritted, and an aggressive glare took over his face, pain and determination flickering in his eyes. Chikara removed his foot from Makoto, remarking that he needed to bind him before he regenerated. However, before he could act, he glanced down, only to find Makoto gone. Shock registered on Chikara's face, but before he could react, Makoto appeared behind him, his body pulsating with a deadly aura as he regenerated. Chikara, stunned, realized that Makoto's regeneration was far quicker than the last time he had captured him. In a flash, Makoto launched an attack, but Chikara, relying on his immense power, swiftly dodged it. Smirking, he remarked that Makoto had indeed become faster. However, in the face of overwhelming strength, he declared, Makoto remained powerless. Chikara followed his words with a brutal punch, slamming Makoto with such force that he questioned whether his regeneration could even keep up. With a merciless grin, he began ripping Makoto's body apart, cutting both his arms. Pointing at him, he mocked his futile strategy, stating that all he did was regenerate and defend without any real thought. He hadn't realized Makoto was this incompetent. However, to Chikara's surprise, Makoto smirked. Narrowing his eyes, Chikara demanded to know the reason behind that grin. Makoto responded that he had been thinking something similar, mocking Chikara by calling him a brainless idiot. Chikara, taken aback by his words, watched in disbelief as Makoto's body regenerated at an accelerated rate. His severed limbs twitched on the ground before surging back toward his body, a red and black energy swirling around him. With a commanding voice, Makoto shouted for his detached parts to move. Chikara scoffed, dismissing the attack as meaningless. He mocked Makoto, questioning whether he truly believed such an assault could affect him. Yet as he fought back, something fell off. His confidence wavered as he struggled against Makoto's renewed onslaught. Confusion flickered in his eyes. Makoto's voice rang out, cold and resolute. He stated that while he had indeed trembled like a frightened animal moments ago, that fear was now being drowned out by something far greater: hatred. As he stepped forward, his body pulsed with an ominous energy, its deadly force radiating from within him. With a vicious swing, he unleashed his power, severing Chikara's arm. Makoto, astonished by the extent of his newfound strength, turned to his ally, Nogu, and declared that they should have a contest of strength. Chikara, now furious, gritted his teeth aggressively, clenching his fists in a fit of rage before letting out a deafening scream. Makoto smirked and confidently declared that he would turn Chikara into nothing more than a punching bag. Enraged beyond reason, Chikara charged at him, roaring that he would reduce him to pieces so that he could never regenerate again. However, before he could strike, Makoto issued a commanding order: gather. In an instant, all of his scattered body parts surged back, fusing together with a fiery burst of power. Fully restored, he launched an explosive attack at Chikara, landing a devastating blow. Asking him how's that, Makoto demanded, his voice filled with wrath. How does it feel to lose in strength? In pain? In hatred? His fiery gaze burned into Chikara as he clenched his fist. With a serious attitude, he exclaimed, "The fear we experienced he will engrave deep into his body." 1 week after the battle with Kongariki at the Byakuren Guild, Haruto and Ishiki walked through the corridor, discussing the preparations for the next Demon King battle. Haruto inquired if the preparations were going well, to which Ishiki responded that it should be done soon. Excitedly, Ishiki stated that they had to work hard for Toru's sake. Haruto, puzzled, asked who Toru was again. Ishiki awkwardly laughed, but Haruto, with a serious demeanor, turned to Kira and questioned what he was saying. Muttering Toru's name, Haruto suddenly appeared to recall and then laughed casually, saying he was just kidding. Ishiki, visibly scared, hesitantly told Haruto not to joke like that, even as a joke. Haruto calmly apologized. Ishiki then mentioned that he hadn't seen Chikara around lately. Haruto responded that Chikara was probably out looking for those siblings. Haruto exclaimed that they had been a good punching bag after all, and Ishiki nodded in agreement. Turning back, Haruto assured Seiya not to worry, stating that Chikara would definitely bring the siblings back. Ishiki, with a sinister grin, exclaimed that those siblings had made him feel uneasy, and once they returned, he would train them to death. Just then, a staff member rushed in, addressing both of them. Curious, they asked what was wrong and why he was so flustered. The staff member informed them that a package had just arrived but added that it wasn't just a package. Both of them were surprised. Ishiki rushed forward, pushing through the crowd, and asked Aya Sajiri what was wrong. Sajiri showed them the box that had arrived. As it was revealed, Ishiki was stunned to see the severed body parts inside. The members recognized the tattoo on the arm and realized it was Chikara's. Sajiri quickly used her magic skills to determine its authenticity. After casting a spell, she confirmed that it wasn't fake. This was indeed a real part of Chikara's body. In anger, Ishiki slammed the table hard, while Sajiri wondered how Chikara could have been defeated. She questioned who could have possibly done this. Haruto, analyzing the situation, stated that Chikara's limbs had been specifically cut off and sent to them, indicating that it must be the work of someone who held a grudge against them. He further explained that Chikara had been searching for those siblings, which led him to assume they were the ones responsible. Ishiki panicked and screamed, insisting that there was no way those two could have defeated Chikara. Haruto, however, remained skeptical. He admitted that he had had doubts ever since Toru was taken down. He explained that although Toru had been weaker in combat compared to them, he was still far stronger than the average hunter. Yet, Toru had been defeated. Now, Chikara, who was among the strongest in the world, had also been taken down. Haruto concluded that the siblings had grown stronger. Ishiki, still panicking, argued that there was no way the siblings could have become strong enough to kill Chikara in such a short time. Haruto interrupted and asked Seiya how they themselves had become so powerful. Ishiki responded that it was obvious. They had kept killing others repeatedly to level up. Suddenly, he paused and exclaimed in realization. When a high-level enemy was defeated, a significant amount of experience points was gained. Understanding this, he realized that the siblings must have killed each other repeatedly to rapidly level up until they had become strong enough to take revenge. The members were stunned at this revelation. Sajiri urged everyone to calm down. Ishiki, still overwhelmed, admitted that he felt bad about Chikara but insisted that they needed to think about their next move. Sajiri approached him and cast a spell to stabilize his mind, advising him to rest for now. He agreed and left to rest. Haruto then apologized and asked Sajiri to leave him alone for a bit. She agreed and left. Once alone, Haruto turned to the box that had arrived earlier. Examining Chikara's body parts, he held the severed arm and scoffed. He questioned whether they really thought they were intimidating them with this, calling it garbage. He then threw the box into the trash, exclaiming that if the siblings thought they could take revenge with just this, they were delusional. He admitted that the fact that they had managed to defeat Chikara was impressive, but called them foolish. With that, he crushed Chikara's severed eye under his foot. At that moment, Makoto, who was on the rooftop, felt the pain as his connection to Chikara's crushed body part was severed. Realizing what had happened, he decided he had gathered enough intel on their base but grew concerned about Minori. Deciding he should head back for now, he thought about how sending them that package was a good excuse to go shopping in town. Even though he had poison resistance, the food in the dungeon wasn't very nutritious. Additionally, he had gotten magic infused into his clothes with shape memory magic, ensuring that even if they got torn or dirty, they would fix themselves. He also picked up a stuffed animal and made sure to bring a souvenir for Minori, who was waiting alone. As he left, he noticed some hunters chasing a young woman wearing a cloak. He wondered why, since this area was under Byakuran's control. Initially, he thought it best not to get involved, but as the hunters got closer and the woman was nearly caught, Makoto decided he couldn't ignore bullies. He appeared behind them and attacked. The hunters, taken aback, demanded to know who he was. Ignoring them, Makoto turned to the woman and stated that there must be some reason she was being chased. He urged her to run away quickly. As he looked at the young woman, he was shocked. He wondered why she was there. Meanwhile, back at their base, Minori anxiously awaited Makoto's return, thinking he should be back soon. Just then, Makoto arrived, carrying the woman. Seeing her, Minori immediately asked what was wrong and who the woman was. Makoto asked her to calm down and told her to take a closer look at the woman's face. As Minori did, her eyes widened in shock as she exclaimed that this person was herself. Seiya Ishiki, the proud captain of the White Lotus Guild and an S-rank swordsman, was admired by many for his exceptional swordsmanship. Women adored him for his handsome looks, and he was known for being friendly and approachable to everyone. As the mood maker of White Lotus, he appeared charismatic and kind, but only the hero party knew the twisted, depraved desires lurking beneath his charming facade. At that moment, Seiya was enjoying himself with Minori. He maniacally licked his sword, expressing his pleasure and declaring that she truly was the best. Unlike other women, he remarked, no matter how much he broke her, she never died. With a brutal slash of his sword, he wounded Minori, making her scream in agony. Seiya, seemingly delighted by the scene, laughed and commented on how sweet her scream was, exclaiming that women were only worth anything when they were suffering. Meanwhile, Makoto, unable to bear watching his sisters suffering any longer, screamed at Ishiki, demanding to know why it was always Minori. In response, Ishiki slashed his sword against Makoto's mouth, silencing him. He sneered, stating that torturing men was no fun. Killing and violating women, he declared, were always the best. With that, Ishiki grabbed Minori and began choking her with great force, his teeth gritted as he demanded to hear her scream even louder. As Minori's cries echoed through the room, Ishiki finally decided to leave. As he stepped out, he noticed Tora and Haruto inside the corridor. That room was supposed to be off-limits to everyone except Haruto. Curiosity sparked within him as he secretly followed them. Just as he was about to observe further, Haruto called out to Seiya, making him panic as he realized he had been caught. Tilting his head back slightly, Haruto remarked that peeking was not appropriate. In response, Ishiki casually stepped forward, laughing awkwardly, admitting that he was merely curious since Tora had entered the room with Haruto. Haruto, unfazed, stated that he didn't mind, explaining that she was disposable anyway. He then asked Ishiki if he wanted to watch too. The three of them entered the room together, and Ishiki was taken aback by what he saw. Tora explained that Haruto had asked him to create an exact clone of Kiryu Minori. As Ishiki observed the green containers scattered around the room, Haruto elaborated further, explaining that if they could mass-produce a being with Minori's regenerative abilities, they would be able to farm experience points even more efficiently. Using White Lotus's resources and Tora's technology, they had successfully created the clones, but they did not function as expected. As Ishiki examined them closely, Haruto explained that the regeneration ability was incomplete. After being killed around 10 times, the clones would stop regenerating. Worse yet, killing them yielded no experience points. Tora added that, despite their attempts to improve the clones, the results had been unsatisfactory. Deciding it was pointless to continue, they had planned to discard them. Ishiki, intrigued, asked if they were going to throw them all away. Tora confirmed this, adding that there was still one final use for them. He elaborated that they would exploit the clones as much as they could before ultimately discarding them, admitting that he could never be satisfied with anything but the real thing. Ishiki, with an eerie grin, demanded that the clones be given to him. Tora agreed but warned that the clones were completely useless, lacking will, emotions, and existing only as defective dolls that blindly followed orders. Ishiki, with a sinister expression, remarked that such conditions were perfect. Tora, puzzled, asked if Ishiki was really getting excited over dolls. Ishiki smirked, staring at one of the containers with manic delight, and corrected him, stating that he didn't like dolls. He liked this one. He further elaborated, claiming that he wanted to cherish it, torture it, violate it, toy with it, and use it as a mere tool. Then, he hesitated before adding that he also wanted to kill it, let it live, and own its entire existence. Haruto, observing Ishiki's obsession, casually remarked that it was no longer mere fixation, it was dependence. He told Seiya that he truly was the absolute worst. Meanwhile, at their base, Makoto and Minori were taken aback upon seeing Minori's clone. Shocked, Makoto asked his sister if she was alright. Minori assured him that she was fine. However, Makoto expressed his concern, realizing that the clones had ended up in Ishiki's hands. Minori's clone confirmed this, admitting that she wasn't sure about the full extent of what had happened. But even now, she was certain that at least a dozen of them were still being used by him. Makoto, still puzzled, asked why she seemed different from what he had heard about clones not supposed to have emotions. She admitted that she didn't know either, but upon seeing something on television by chance, something warm had awakened inside her. At that moment, she became aware of her hatred and resentment towards Seiya Ishiki. Understanding her emotions for the first time, she had fled from the mansion. However, she knew that there were still others like her trapped there, and she desperately pleaded with the siblings to help save them. Makoto, deep in thought, suddenly turned to Minori and proposed using the clones to kill Ishiki. Minori, horrified, demanded to know what he was saying. Makoto explained that Ishiki had no idea the clones had emotions and always let his guard down around them. They could take advantage of this and eliminate him. Minori, shaken, asked what would happen to the clones if they were discovered. Makoto grimly admitted that, at worst, they would be killed. Minori, now visibly terrified, grabbed her brother's arms aggressively and screamed in frustration. She reminded him that these girls had never chosen to be born. Breaking down in tears, she sobbed, insisting that despite everything, they were still alive. She furiously told him never to speak of using them or allowing them to die. Minori then hugged her clone tightly, explaining that these girls were created from her own cells. They were like her little sisters. Wasn't it natural to want to save her own sisters if they cried for help? Makoto, still enraged, shouted back that if Minori's clones were inside the mansion, they could infiltrate it and finally take their revenge on Ishiki. He declared that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Minori, glaring at him, challenged his morality, asking if sacrificing others for their own goals made them any different from Ishiki and his men. Makoto, frustrated, tried to explain that he didn't mean it that way. However, Minori, determined, looked at her clone and vowed that they would save them all. The man who treated her sisters like trash, Ishiki Seiya, would pay for his sins. Rage filled her heart, and a deadly aura swirled around her as she screamed her intent to kill him with her own hands. Seeing the unwavering determination in Minori's eyes, Makoto finally relented, agreeing to save the clones. He then apologized to Minori for scaring her. Minori reassured him, stating that there was no need to worry they would rescue them. She promised. Overcome with emotion, her clone wiped away her tears and nodded in agreement. With their resolve strengthened, the siblings departed, prepared for their mission. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Ishiki was consumed by rage. He violently beat several clones, demanding to know how one with no self-awareness had managed to escape. He screamed at them, demanding an answer, and furiously questioned why no one had stopped her. His voice echoed through the halls as he shouted, ordering them to retrieve the clone immediately. The clones responded nods in agreement. The trio arrived at the city, with clones chasing the young woman. Just then, she bumped into a block and fell down. The clones captured her and reported back to the mansion that they had found their target and were returning with her. To ensure she wouldn't resist, they made her faint using an electric shot. Makoto, alongside the clone, watched them. It was revealed that the one they captured was actually Minori. Makoto commented that it looked like they really did come after her when she ran. Minori's clone responded that it seemed so. Minori's clone then asked Makoto if the original would be all right. He reassured her that Minori would be fine and wouldn't go down that easily. With that, the two of them went after the group. Upon arriving at the mansion, Makoto observed the grand structure and remarked that Ishiki's mansion was even bigger than he had imagined. Minori's clone informed him that their job had been to serve in that place back when they were at their base. Before this, Minori had been preparing her clone by marking a sign on her cheek similar to that of the other clones. Makoto arrived holding a bag. Curious, Minori asked him what it was. He replied that it was his ear. Startled, Minori grew scared, but he quickly explained that it was an application of his body manipulation skill. If she kept it with her, he could listen to what was happening inside. He then patted her head reassuringly, promising that if anything happened, he would rush in immediately. Minori nodded in agreement. After she left, Makoto called out to her, expressing that he was counting on her. Back at the mansion, the clones arrived with Minori and addressed Ishiki, informing him that they had captured number 10, who had escaped. Ishiki, unimpressed, scoffed at their report. He turned to Minori and shouted angrily, demanding to know why she had run away. Kneeling apologetically, Minori explained that she had noticed a suspicious figure outside and had gone to pursue them. She assured him that the intruder had been disposed of, so there was no issue. Ishiki, however, warned her sternly that if she acted on her own again, she would be dealt with. With that, he walked away. As he left, Haruto called for a remote meeting and coldly ordered that the matter be taken care of before he was done. Minori responded with a quiet acknowledgement. Makoto, listening in, furrowed his brows in concern, wondering what they meant by get rid of it. Meanwhile, Minori and her clone entered a room, only for Minori to be utterly horrified by the gruesome sight before her. The floor was littered with clone bodies, bloodstains splattered across every corner. Clones were methodically disposing of the corpses. She exclaimed that it was terrible, far too cruel to witness. Turning to the other clone, she urged that they needed to run while Ishiki's eyes weren't on them. However, the clone looked at her in confusion and questioned why they needed to escape. Minori was taken aback and shocked to hear such a response. The clone continued, asserting that serving their master was their duty. In disbelief, Minori called out to the rest of the clones in the room, pleading with them to realize what was being done to them. But the clones merely continued their work, responding nonchalantly that they were simply disposing of bodies. Minori pressed further, demanding to know why they didn't think this was wrong. She exclaimed that they could never be happy in a place like this. The clones, however, appeared unfazed. They questioned what happiness even was. Minori was left speechless as the clone coldly explained that they were the master slaves. There was no need for will or self-awareness. They existed to serve on command, to accept punishment on command, to offer their bodies on command, nothing more, nothing less. They were merely objects to be used by their master. Outside the mansion, Makoto, who had been listening to the conversation, clenched his fists in frustration. Furious, he slammed his hand against a tree, gritting his teeth in disbelief. Inside, Minori refused to accept the clone's mentality. She declared that it was completely messed up, but the clones simply disagreed. Unable to take it any longer, Minori screamed that it was absolutely wrong. Suddenly, she hugged the clone tightly, expressing that she knew her better than anyone. She gently asked if it had hurt, if it had been painful. The clone, surprised by the sudden warmth, attempted to push Minori away, telling her to let go. But Minori refused. Turning back to face the rest of the clones, she shouted that the claim of having no will was a lie, that the claim of having no self was a lie. She insisted that they simply didn't know how to express it, but that was okay. Grasping the clone's hand, she declared that they would definitely save her. The clone, however, hesitated, stating that Minori simply didn't understand. Just then, Ishiki stormed into the room, breaking the door down in a fit of rage. Demanding to know who had permitted them to speak, he glared at her furiously. The clones instantly bowed, but Minori remained upright, defiant. Furious at her disobedience, Ishiki punched her hard, his voice filled with rage as he called her a defective product that needed to be disposed of. As Minori reeled from the impact, painful memories of the torture Ishiki had inflicted on her flooded her mind. Gritting her teeth, she looked up at him with an aggressive expression. This only served to enrage Ishiki further. He demanded to know what that look on her face was. Drawing his sword, he prepared to strike her down. Just then, a clone from behind hesitated before calling out, asking Ishiki to wait. This act of defiance sent Ishiki into a blind rage. Without hesitation, he attacked the clone with an arrow, roaring that they dared to give him orders. His patience worn thin, he bellowed that he had had enough. If they continued acting on their own, they would all die. As he raised his weapon again, Minori rushed forward, blocking the attack. Ishiki's eyes widened in surprise. He muttered in astonishment that a clone had protected another clone. Licking the blood off his sword, he reveled in the taste and scent, observing Minori closely. Then, realization dawned upon him, and he burst into laughter. He taunted Minori, asking if she was, in fact, the original Kiryu Minori. Meanwhile, outside, Makoto, having heard everything, immediately rushed toward the mansion. He quickly informed Minori's clone that Ishiki had found out the truth. Without hesitation, he charged inside. As soon as he entered, alarms blared throughout the mansion, signaling an intruder's presence. Ishiki smirked, amused by the situation. He mused that Minori's big brother had come to rescue her. With a sinister grin, he dismissed the notion, stating that it didn't matter. There was no way Makoto would make it inside anyway. Minori, furious, demanded to know what he meant by that. Ishiki chuckled, explaining that the entire mansion was filled with combat-trained clones. With a manic glint in his eyes, he added that they all looked exactly like Minori's little sister. Amused, he wondered aloud just how far that Siscon would be able to fight. Meanwhile, Makoto found himself in a battle against the combat clones, determined to push forward. One of the clones attacked Makoto, but just then, Minori's clone rushed in, pushing the other clone aside. She demanded, with a sharp voice, what number 10 was doing. She then shouted that Makoto was her real older brother and immediately moved to cover him protectively. The clones, unfazed, responded that it didn't matter. Their master had ordered the elimination of the intruder, and whether he was her older brother or not was irrelevant. Furthermore, for trying to defend the intruder, Minori's clone would now be regarded as an enemy and eliminated as well. Before she could speak, Makoto stopped her, assuring her calmly that it was okay. As her older brother, he declared that he would take care of everything. With that, he put on his face mask, his body swirling with immense power and red energy. Meanwhile, Ishiki took sadistic pleasure in playing with Minori, torturing her mercilessly. He slashed her with his sword, pulled her hair viciously, and then inhaled deeply, savoring the moment before bursting into laughter like a crazed psychopath. With a wild, maniacal expression, he exclaimed that, as expected, the real thing was far more satisfying. Without hesitation, he struck her hard, slamming her into the floor. Tilting his head back, he let out a scream, declaring that ever since Tora and Power had been killed, he had been utterly pissed off every single day. Turning back to Minori, he questioned why she had come back when she had already run away before. As he brutally hit her again, his voice dripped with mockery as he asked if she had returned just to be his pet once more. Minori, burning with rage, clenched her fists tightly. With a furious glare, she spat out that she would never forgive the man who had toyed with her and these children. Her anger erupted, and she stood straight in front of him, screaming her resolve. Ishiki, unfazed, responded casually, questioning if she truly sought revenge on the one who had tormented her. Without hesitation, he grabbed one of the clones by her hair, lifting her effortlessly. He stated that Minori had gone to great lengths to save these mere puppets, but with a cruel grin, he slashed the clone's neck with his sword, casually commenting on how tough it must be for her. Minori's eyes widened in horror as she witnessed the traumatizing sight before her. A scream tore from her lips. Overcome with rage, she lunged forward and grabbed Ishiki by his shoulder, pulling with all her strength. Ishiki, unimpressed, sneered at her efforts and mocked her, asking if she truly believed she could wound a swordsman like him with such a pitiful level of skill. Without warning, he slashed Minori's arm and kicked her brutally, sending her crashing into the floor. Looking down at her, he spoke with cruel amusement, declaring that he would teach her something. These so-called children she was so desperate to protect weren't even alive, he said. Then, without hesitation, he slashed the clone into 2 pieces, coldly stating that whether he played with them or broke them, it was entirely up to him. Minori immediately jumped forward to save the clone, her determination burning fiercely. Ishiki, watching her with twisted delight, smirked and admitted that he hadn't expected to see such a defiant expression on her face. He licked his sword, his eyes gleaming with sadistic pleasure, and stated that he would twist that expression into pure despair. Minori outstretched her arms protectively, shielding the remaining clones. Ishiki, unimpressed, swung his sword, cutting her wrists deeply as Minori let out a pained, aggressive scream. Refusing to back down, she summoned her skill, casting a powerful spell. A magical circle appeared, swirling with vibrant yellow and red energy. However, before she could attack, Ishiki stabbed the clone beside her, his voice commanding her not to move. Minori's skills failed, leaving her sitting helplessly on the floor, her body covered in wounds and drenched in blood. Ishiki, relishing the moment, taunted her, asking if she even realized the hopelessness of her situation. He continued stabbing the clone, a smirk playing on his lips as he reminded her that these creatures she was so desperately trying to save were nothing more than worthless dolls. Minori, trembling with frustration, gritted her teeth and pushed herself forward. Ishiki, watching her struggle, chuckled darkly and questioned why she was trying so hard to save them. He then mockingly suggested that she should at least ask for help properly. Laughing, he pointed at the ground and ordered her to kneel. Minori's anger flared even more, but before she could react, Ishiki stabbed her again, this time even harder. His voice grew more commanding as he shouted at her, demanding to know what was wrong. Didn't she want to help them? Then, he screamed at her to get on the floor and submit. His eyes burned with twisted amusement as he held up his bladed fingers and sneered. Because she refused to kneel, he warned, she would now witness the consequences. Aggressively, he threw his blades at the clone, his voice filled with malice as he declared that these dolls would suffer even more. Minori's eyes widened in terror. Overcome with fear, she screamed, begging him to stop. Ishiki merely repeated her words mockingly, savoring her desperation. "Is that all?" he taunted. Minori, feeling utterly helpless, fell to her knees and pleaded with him. She begged him not to torment the children any further. Ishiki smirked in satisfaction as he mused. Now then, what should he do? He reminded her that these clones were his toys. Then, slamming his foot against her brutally, he sneered. If she truly wanted to save them, then perhaps she should become their replacement. Pointing his sword directly at her, he gave her a sinister command. She was to lick his blade. Minori hesitated, her entire body trembling with revulsion. Ishiki, seeing her reluctance, reminded her coldly that she had no right to refuse. Then, to make his point clear, he sliced off the clone's arm, reveling in the sound of her agonized screams. With an icy smirk, he informed Minori that the only words she was allowed to say in front of him were yes or understood. Terror-stricken and desperate to protect the clones, Minori whispered a trembling yes and, with sheer humiliation, obeyed his command. She licked the sword as Ishiki burst into uncontrollable laughter. However, the moment she did, he suddenly slashed her tongue brutally. Minori screamed in unbearable pain, tears streaming down her face. Ishiki, still grinning wickedly, grabbed the tip of her severed tongue and, to her horror, ate it. He let out a maniacal sigh, savoring the taste with twisted delight. Minori, now completely terrified, tried to escape, running away desperately. But before she could do so, Ishiki grabbed her by the throat, choking her cruelly. With an evil grin, he whispered that he wouldn't let her escape. As she struggled, Ishiki began ripping her clothes apart, his laughter echoing in the room. His eyes burned with insatiable desire as he demanded to see more of her suffering. Just as he was about to strip her further with his sword, laughing like a crazed beast, a sudden, earth-shattering impact sent him flying. Makoto had arrived just in time. With a powerful punch fueled by sheer rage, he struck Ishiki with full force, landing a devastating blow to protect his sister. After attacking Ishiki, Makoto ran quickly to Minori, covering her with a cloak and apologizing for being late. She smiled at him, assuring him that it was okay and that she knew he would come. Ishiki barely got up and shouted at Makoto, demanding to know what he had done to the clones in the mansion. He asked if Makoto had killed them, referring to the dolls modeled after his sister. Makoto responded firmly, stating that he would never kill them because they were his sisters. He further explained that although he had been rough, he had only incapacitated them. Ishiki laughed and mocked him, calling him a boring guy. He stated that if it were him, he would have made things far more interesting. He would have captured Makoto and violated his sister right in front of him over and over again. Makoto's rage ignited as he retorted that there was a better way and that he would crush Ishiki 1,000,000 times. Without hesitation, he attacked. Ishiki, commenting on Makoto's strength, acknowledged that it was no wonder he had taken down the clones. As the battle began, Ishiki launched his instant strike, using his power and skills to unleash a lightning god flash attack at Makoto, cutting his arms. But Makoto stood firm. Using his body manipulation skills, his severed arms struck Ishiki with a powerful force, sending him crashing through a wall. Screaming in frustration, Ishiki ordered the clones in the hall to become his shield. The clones obediently shielded him. Makoto mocked him, calling him pathetic for hiding behind the very girls he had used and abused. With a wild expression, Ishiki barked at him to shut up, stating that the clones were his dolls and that it was none of Makoto's business how he used them. Makoto had had enough. He ordered Ishiki to stop talking. Just then, Ishiki commanded the clones to capture Makoto. The clones attacked, forcing him to dodge as he imagined Minori in them. At that moment, Minori screamed for her brother, but a clone slashed her, causing her to cry out in pain. Makoto's attention snapped to her as the clones restrained him. Struggling, he ordered them to let him go, pleading with them not to hurt his precious person. As he looked at the clone, she was brutally stabbed with multiple swords and arrows. Ishiki laughed maniacally and attacked Makoto from behind, taunting him, reminding him that Minori was his precious little sister and daring him to protect her. One of the clones suddenly jumped in, taking the stab instead. Makoto, filled with sorrow, apologized to her for making her go through so much pain. The clone, stunned, assured him that it was her job. Ishiki, unimpressed, stabbed even harder, stating that it was never her job. She was merely following orders. Makoto turned back, his gaze burning with fury. Ishiki pulled out his sword and screamed at him, questioning the look in his eyes. He lunged forward, attacking, but Makoto dodged. Ishiki scoffed, asking if Makoto was running away, then declared that he would kill the clone in retaliation. Unable to bear it any longer, Makoto jumped in, saving the clone but taking the slash himself. Ishiki laughed, mocking him for not even resisting. Minori desperately called out to her brother, but Ishiki taunted them further. He warned that if Makoto resisted, he would just torture his sister more. With that, he used his powerful sword technique, serpent severing, cutting Makoto's body parts into tiny pieces. Makoto collapsed onto the floor. Ishiki crushed his head under his foot, declaring that Makoto would now watch as he had plenty of fun with his sisters. But at that moment, Makoto pushed him away. To Ishiki's horror, he regenerated. Standing up with a deadly aura, Makoto smirked and asked what made Ishiki think he had won. Startled, Ishiki shouted that Makoto was nothing more than a dead man walking, acting tough. Makoto extended his arm, shielding the clones behind him. One of the clones, confused, asked why he was going so far to protect them. With a gentle smile, Makoto replied that he didn't need a reason to protect his sisters. The clones were shocked by his words. Ishiki scoffed, questioning what kind of brother Makoto thought he was. He sneered, saying that the clones were just dolls made with White Lotus technology. No matter how much Makoto protected them, they were just slaves bound to obey him. Laughing, Ishiki commanded the clones to kill Makoto, promising favors to whoever did. The clones, however, remained motionless, refusing to act. Growing angry, Ishiki shouted at them, demanding obedience and warning them not to ignore him. Still, the clones hesitated. Minori's clone, number 10, stepped forward, calling out to the others. She reminded them that they should understand by now. Ishiki's anger flared as he gritted his teeth, his frustration evident. The clone continued, urging them to remember everything they had been through, why this man had been protecting them so much, and who their real enemy was. As the clones exchanged mysterious glances, their focus shifted to Ishiki. He was now visibly afraid. Surrounding him, the clones spoke in unison, declaring that they would not allow him to hurt their brother any longer. As the clones surrounded Ishiki, Minori's clone, number 10, and Makoto wondered what was happening. The doll then commented that they were clones of Kiryu Minori. At the genetic level, they were nearly identical. No, they were similar to the original Minori. Perhaps that was why the scenes that had been seen by the original Minori started flowing into her mind. She further stated that she had witnessed how her brother had tried to protect them so desperately. Makoto thought for a moment and realized that it was a body manipulation skill. Body manipulation was a skill that allowed the user to freely control their severed body parts freely. Minori had unconsciously shared the vision she saw with the clones that shared her exact genetic appearance. Ishiki screamed in frustration, demanding that the dolls belonged only to him. Furiously, he shouted at them, insisting that they should act like the puppets they were and obey his commands. However, the clones responded that they could not comply with that order. The dolls, though uncertain about the warmth they felt, declared that anyone who tried to hurt their brother was their enemy, no matter who they were. With an evil grin, Ishiki declared that he would skewer all of them into pieces with his blade. As he took out his sword, Makoto jumped in and challenged him, making it clear that he would not let that happen. With an aggressive punch, Makoto slammed Ishiki hard onto the floor. The clones followed up, attacking both of Ishiki's hands with their javelins, leaving him screaming in agony. Ishiki lay on the floor, wounded all over and utterly helpless. With a fiery gaze, Makoto then asked how he should kill him. However, Minori interrupted, reminding Makoto of his promise and demanding to do it herself. With a deadly expression filled with rage, she exclaimed that this time, she had to take revenge with her own hands, or else she would never be satisfied. Terrified, Ishiki screamed and pleaded for them to stop while the clones pinned down both of his legs. Minori gripped a massive weapon, her deadly intent radiating ominously. A crimson glow surrounded her as her eyes flared with a blood-red light. Swinging the weapon downward with immense force, she unleashed a devastating shockwave. The strike landed mercilessly between Ishiki's legs, crushing his most vulnerable spot with a sickening impact. His agonized screams pierced the air, blood spurting violently as his body convulsed from the unbearable pain. His face twisted in sheer horror. Minori, still filled with rage, exclaimed that it was not enough. Aggressively, she shouted that she would crush him until his voice was completely gone. Just as she was about to attack him again, her clone, Number 10, stopped her, requesting a moment. Number 10 stated that they had suffered unimaginable pain at Ishiki's hands, and it was not just them. Dozens of people like them had been turned into his playthings and killed. With a deadly gaze, she declared that he should experience the same suffering, no, even more. Makoto interrupted, expressing that he understood how they felt. He acknowledged that what they all had gone through was true hell, killed over and over, violated over and over. A clone then revealed to Makoto that in the basement of the mansion, there was a certain creature from a dungeon being kept there. It had been drugged using Byakuran's technology so that it would violate anything that moved. Makoto questioned whether the creature would attack even human men. The clone confirmed this and explained that before, a hunter who had defied Seiya Ishiki had been violated by that creature. Calling Minori, Makoto asked if she was fine with this. Minori stated that as long as they could take their revenge on Ishiki, she had no objections. With that, Makoto agreed and told them to show him the way. Number 10 led the way as they chained Ishiki and dragged him into the basement, his screams and desperate shouts echoing through the hallways. When they reached Lab Minori's clone Number 10 opened the cage, they threw Ishiki in front of the monster's enclosure. Terrified, Ishiki pleaded for them to stop. Above him, a giant beast loomed, its crimson eyes glowing ominously. Makoto recognized it as an emperor orc and recalled that just one of these creatures was capable of populating an entire nation. The clone explained that, originally, the creature had only been interested in females. However, through Byakuran's modifications, using drugs and other means, it had turned into something that would breed regardless of gender. Minori, nauseated by the revelation, covered her mouth and exclaimed that she could not watch this. Number 10 lowered the shutter as the creature ripped off Ishiki's clothes. His terrified screams filled the basement. The creature looked at him in a twisted way before pinning him down, tormenting him. His screams echoed in the chamber. Minori and Makoto looked down and turned away, disturbed. Number 10 asked if both of them were all right. They responded that they were fine, though Makoto admitted he was a little tired and needed to rest. Minori also agreed, stating that she felt the same way. Both of them looked shaken and flustered. The clone smiled and offered to make some tea, suggesting they take a short break. After a while, as they enjoyed their tea in the lab, Number 10 expressed gratitude, thanking them for going through with something this extreme. Makoto sighed and stated that he had planned to kill Ishiki eventually, anyway the timing had just worked out. Minori then pointed out that she had accepted a request not to kill anyone, and as a result, no one had died since the battle had started. Number 10 bowed respectfully and expressed deep gratitude, thanking Makoto once again. However, Makoto dismissed the thanks, stating that this was not something he should be appreciated for. Changing the subject, he requested to be guided around the mansion, explaining that they needed to gather supplies and information on Byakuran. Minori's clone, Number 10, smiled and agreed. She then stated that she would stay behind until the end to take care of things. Turning to another clone, Number 3, she asked her to guide their big brother. Smiling, Number 3 agreed and led the way. As they walked, Makoto asked what they planned to do from now on. Number 3 admitted that they did not know. They had not been born by choice. They had been created. She exclaimed that no one in this world would likely accept them. Flustered by her words, Makoto immediately shouted that it was not true. Even if the whole world did not accept them, he and Minori would. It did not matter why they were born or what they wanted to do. They had the right to live. His words shocked number 3. She then smiled and agreed, acknowledging that he was right. As she entered the password to unlock the room, she turned to Makoto with a smile and stated that she would live her life to the fullest. Just then, without warning, her neck was slashed in front of Makoto's eyes. Makoto stood there, shocked, unable to process what had just happened. He was flustered as he saw number 3's head separate from her body. Standing before him, smiling, was Haruto. With a smirk, he exclaimed that it had been a while. Kira stood tall, his presence cold and menacing. Blood still dripped from his blade, and a streak stained his cheek. Behind him, all the Minori clones lay lifeless across the blood-soaked floor. He had asked Makoto where Seiya Ishiki was. Makoto, seated beside the body of a fallen clone, had placed his hand on her motionless chest. His jaw clenched in fury as he stared at Kira without responding. Kira took a step forward, claiming it didn't particularly bother him, though he would have liked to witness the emotional reunion between Makoto and Minori. Then, with his expression darkening, he revealed his true intention. He had planned to take care of everyone. Without further warning, Kira swung his blade in the air. A flash of blue energy burst forward, and the wind pressure alone was enough to slice through Makoto's arms, severing them completely. They dropped to the ground, and Makoto's eyes widened in stunned horror. Kira taunted him, saying he hadn't made it in time. Enraged, Makoto had lunged at him. His arms were already regenerating, thanks to his immortality, but the fury in his eyes burned brighter than the pain. As he flew through the air, he gathered energy into his fist and threw a punch at Kira. But Kira had dodged it easily, and remarked that Makoto was far slower than he had expected. Makoto attempted another punch, but once again, Kira dodged it effortlessly, moving with infuriating calm. Taking a battle stance, Kira allowed his energy to surge, his radiant aura pulsing around him. He gripped his sword tightly and told Makoto that reckless attacks were useless. Then, with a maniacal laugh, he declared that he would show Makoto how to truly fight. He swung his blade again. The force of the slash was immense. It not only severed Makoto's arm once more, but also broke through the wall behind him. Makoto stared at the destruction in disbelief. The sheer pressure had been enough to rip through his flesh and demolish the wall. Shocked and furious, Makoto had called Kira a monster. Kira simply chuckled and remarked that it was inappropriate to call someone a monster when one was immortal. Makoto looked down at the fresh wound, focusing his mind to regenerate his arm quickly. But something was wrong. The blood wouldn't stop, and his skill wouldn't activate. He tried again, still nothing. Confusion and panic set in as he realized his regeneration had halted. Kira laughed and explained that when he had struck earlier, he had enchanted his sword with holy attributes. Because of that, Makoto wouldn't be able to regenerate for a while. Makoto began to panic. The power Kira possessed was beyond overwhelming. There was no way he could win like this. But even in this dire state, he had to make sure Minori escaped. That much he decided he would die for. Still on his knees, he asked Kira how he had known they were there. Kira had taken a moment before replying that the regular reports from Seiya Ishiki had stopped coming through, so he had come to check personally. By sheer chance, he had found Makoto there, what he called luck on his side. He laughed, adding that from Makoto's perspective, it must have been bad luck. Then, turning slightly before glancing back at him, Kira pointed out that Makoto had said "we" earlier. That meant Minori was in the mansion as well. Makoto's fearful expression confirmed it. His gritted teeth betrayed everything. Kira smiled and told him not to worry. He wasn't planning to avenge his comrades. In fact, he said he was grateful Makoto had killed them. Makoto, still kneeling, couldn't understand what he meant. Kira then stretched his arms, saying that killing his comrades had raised his own power level even more. If he killed Makoto now, he would be able to level up even more efficiently. His smile grew darker as he explained that all he wanted was power, and his comrades had merely been tools to fuel his growth. Makoto, horrified, thought that Kira must have lost his mind. Kira responded to the thought itself, stating that he didn't know what was going on in his mind either. Who knew? Then, in a blink, he disappeared. A moment later, he reappeared in front of Makoto and stabbed him in the stomach. Blood sprayed from Makoto's mouth as Kira smiled. Lifting Makoto off the ground, impaled on his blade, Kira began to laugh in manic joy. His level increased rapidly, and he declared that this feeling, this overwhelming excitement, was the best. But then, at his feet, Kira felt a pull. Makoto's severed hands had gripped Kira's legs. In front of him, Makoto lunged again, his fist clenched, his other arm still severed. With determination, Makoto shouted that he would kill Kira. Kira laughed and responded that it was impossible. He activated his ability. A massive burst of energy exploded from him, Sanctuary, Sacred Realm, and it sent Makoto crashing to the ground once again, back on his knees. As Kira approached, he slashed at Makoto several times, calling him weak again and again. Blood poured from Makoto with each strike. With a calm smirk, Kira mocked him, saying that at his current level, he couldn't kill him. He couldn't even touch him. Makoto's eyes widened in terror. His regeneration wasn't keeping up with the speed of Kira's strikes. Kira paused, allowing Makoto to barely regenerate. Then he raised his sword and said that all he wanted was overwhelming power. Whether it was Makoto or Minori didn't matter, as long as he could use them as nourishment. He gave Makoto a choice. If he quietly surrendered, Kira would spare Minori. But if he resisted, Kira would restrain him and take Minori anyway. Makoto asked if he was lying. Kira replied that it depended entirely on Makoto's attitude. Makoto's expression turned to panic. He bowed his head, sweat dripping from his face, and then fell to the ground, kneeling before Kira. In a voice filled with dread, he pleaded for Kira to capture him, but to spare his sister. He repeated the plea again and again, begging for Minori's life. Kira laughed and asked whether Makoto had any dignity or pride left. Then, stepping closer, he said he would spare her just this once, for the sake of Makoto's foolish little head. Relief washed over Makoto's face. But then Kira leaned in close and grinned. With an evil laugh, he said that he had been lying all along. He added that he would kill Minori anyway, just as he'd always planned. Makoto, furious, lunged forward with everything he had left. He threw a punch, but Kira leapt backward, dodging it effortlessly. While Kira was still midair, four Minori clones suddenly appeared, surrounding him with weapons in hand. One of the clones shouted to the others to protect their big brother. Kira sneered and remarked that there were still clones left. He mocked the fact that Seiya Ishiki had taken his time finishing them off. Minori called out to Makoto to ask if he was alright, but instead of answering her, he shouted at all the clones to stop. He warned them that they couldn't win against Kira. Kira, unfazed, swung his blade once and sliced two clones in half instantly. Makoto cried out for him to stop. One of the remaining Minori clones turned toward the real Minori and Makoto, holding an object in her hands. She acknowledged that they couldn't win against Kira, but she believed she could buy enough time for the two of them to escape. Kira noticed and turned his attention toward her. He launched into the air and flew straight at them. Makoto jumped in front of Minori and her clone to protect them. The clone activated the device and, before the light consumed her, declared that Makoto and Minori had saved them all from hell. Now, it was their turn to return the favor. A blue glow burst outward, teleportation, instantaneous transfer. Makoto and Minori's eyes widened as they disappeared from the spot. Kira tried to slash them, but the magic had already transported them away. The clone who had triggered the magic collapsed, unconscious. Kira stared at her, realizing what had happened. It was teleportation magic, and it required immense magical power, just like the kind possessed by Sajiri, the mage from his team. The remaining clones surrounded him. Kira chuckled, telling them that it didn't matter how many came at him. He would cut them all down. One of the clones stepped forward, dropped her pistol, and opened her shirt. She told Kira that he should already know the kind of abilities they possessed. She recalled the voice of Teru, another member of Kira's team, one who had been killed by Makoto and Minori, saying that clones were just tools to be used and discarded. A bead of sweat formed on Kira's forehead as he watched. The clone ripped open her shirt completely, revealing a glowing blue stone embedded in her chest, the same stone used for teleportation. Kira muttered to himself, realizing what it was. A biological bomb, powered by immense magical energy. The glow intensified. With a serene smile, the clone whispered, "Big brother Makoto, sister Minori, thank you." As it activated, a splash of huge blue aura occurred. Sajiri Aya was known as a mage, one who held the title of the most beautiful woman in Byakuren, the powerful guild led by Kira. With her stunning looks and calm, impartial demeanor, many people who met her fell for her charm at least once. But only those who had truly spent time with her understood the truth behind her mask. Beneath her grace and gentleness lay a woman filled with menace, one who took pleasure in killing and bloodshed. That was her true face. Around 6 months ago, Sajiri had arrived at the guild's headquarters. At the main entrance, she had identified herself, and the system had verified her identity. Upon entry, she had walked into a secluded chamber filled with experimental tools and magical equipment. As she moved toward the control console, she had wondered aloud how much she had managed to collect so far. When she checked the extraction progress, the display had indicated that she had collected 50% of Makoto and Minori's blood. Her lips had curled into a pleased smile as she noted the progress. Everything was going smoothly, though she had thought to herself that she needed to speed things up. Inside a large glass cube, Makoto and Minori had been suspended, their expressions hollow and filled with disbelief. Sajiri had noticed that the machine had stopped functioning. Frustrated, she had quickly rebooted it. Beneath the cube, a fan had begun to spin faster and faster. Fear had returned to the siblings' faces as their bodies slowly descended toward the whirring blades. In just a few moments, the fan had begun slicing through their bodies. Their screams of agony had echoed through the room as blood sprayed across the walls of the cube. Sajiri had simply watched with delight, her smile widening as their suffering intensified. She had stepped forward and approached the cube, pressing her hands against the glass while staring directly into the eyes of the immortal siblings. From inside the chamber, blood had begun flowing into separate steel tanks. Sajiri had known that this process wouldn't help her level up like other guild members, but that had meant little to her. The display had updated. 52%. Leaning closer, she had burst out laughing. For her, nothing else mattered as long as she could obtain Makoto and Minori's blood. She had always assumed that people nearing death would resemble zombies, but the smoothness of their skin had surprised her. Minori's tears had trailed down her cheeks, glistening even through the blood. Sajiri had mused aloud that no matter how much immortals were tortured, the moment they died, their skin returned to that of a newborn. She had remarked that eternal youth was every woman's ultimate dream. With it came beauty, influence, and wealth. Everything would fall into her hands effortlessly. She had then grown irritated by the thought that the immortal siblings had been born with such a gift without working for it. To her, that was unfair, infuriating. Opening the tap of the blood container, she had filled a glass with the dark red liquid and claimed that, as long as she had the blood, she no longer had to worry. Raising the glass, she had taken a deep drink, a look of malevolent satisfaction spreading across her face. She had believed that simply drinking the blood of immortals would allow her to maintain her youthful, radiant skin. Spreading her arms with joy, she had shouted that it was perfect. Then, looking back at Makoto and Minori, she had demanded they offer her more blood. At that moment, Kira had been standing behind her, watching in silence, a faint, cold laugh escaping his lips. Back in the present, the explosion caused by the clone suicide attack had reduced the entire area to ruins. The building had been completely obliterated. Only one figure remained.
Kira.
He stood calmly among the wreckage, unharmed, not a single scratch on his body. Some unknown ability had allowed him to survive the blast. Looking around, he had noticed the absence of any signs, no corpses, no blood, no siblings. He had silently wondered whether they had managed to escape. Sheathing his blade, Kira had received a call on his watch. Sajari's image had flickered onto the display. They had exchanged greetings, but she had wasted no time. She had shouted, demanding to know where the siblings were and why he still hadn't captured them. Kira had responded that it seemed they had killed Seiya and escaped once again. In response, Sajari had exploded with fury, shouting that she didn't care about Seiya and that he needed to hurry up and catch the siblings because she wanted their blood. When Kira had calmly asked her why she was in such a rush, reminding her that she had plenty of their blood stored, she had screamed at him. She had insisted that it needed to be fresh or it wouldn't be effective. Then, in a near panic, she had begun to rant about what would become of her beauty, her youth, her elegance. Kira had sighed, remarking that she was too loud. He had told her he didn't care about her youth or her appearance. That had only made Sajari angrier. She had accused him of being useless and demanded again that he hurry and capture Makoto and Minori. Kira's tone had suddenly turned frigid. He had asked since when she had become important enough to give him orders. Without waiting for a reply, he had drawn his blade and sliced through the communicator on his wrist. But just before the call had cut off, he had said coldly that if she wanted their blood so badly, she should go capture them herself. Mockingly, he had added that if she kept getting so angry, she'd get wrinkles. The line had gone dead. Meanwhile, back at her laboratory, Sajari had stood fuming. Grinding her teeth, she had activated her magic, flames appearing at her fingertips. Letting out a furious cry, she had blasted the ground with a burst of fire. Flames had exploded around her. Standing tall amidst the inferno, she had whispered her resolve. She would take matters into her own hands. Elsewhere, Makoto had finally regained consciousness. As he opened his eyes, he saw Minori sitting beside him, calling his name. Her face had lit up with relief. He was finally awake. Looking around at the unfamiliar surroundings, Makoto had asked her where they were. Minori had explained that it was a dungeon and that the explosion had blown them all the way near the gate. Makoto had immediately asked about the others. Minori hadn't responded. Instead, she had lowered her gaze. Her silence and expression had said everything. Realizing the truth, Makoto had clenched his fists in anguish and punched the ground beside him, teeth grinding in frustration. He had remembered the fight with Kira, muttering that he had failed to save them, despite promising that he would. Suddenly, Minori had stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him from behind. She had told him that she knew he had fought for them and that everyone else understood that too. Still filled with regret, Makoto had said that he had said terrible things in the beginning and that he had wanted to make up for it by saving them. Minori had reassured him that it was okay. Through her, his feelings had reached everyone. That was why the clones had chosen to fight on their side in the end. Tears had welled in her eyes as she told him that they had even received the clones' final message. It had played live, just for them. Makoto had looked up, shocked. The weight of that truth had hit him, and tears had begun streaming down his face. He had cried, calling himself weak. That was why this had happened. Minori had continued to hug him, trying to comfort him. Makoto had cried harder, stating that he wanted to become stronger. Strong enough to prevent anything like this from ever happening again. Minori had agreed. She, too, wanted to become stronger. She had asked him to do it together, with her. The two had reached out and taken each other's hands. As they stood and began walking forward, Minori had told him he had been unconscious for an entire day. During that time, she said, Byakuren had made another announcement about them. Makoto had guessed that it must have been about them killing Seiya Ishiki, but Minori had said it wasn't. Showing him the screen on her phone, she had revealed the truth. The bounty on both of them had been raised tenfold, 5 billion per person. Makoto had stared at the number and muttered that it was absurd. Minori had added that everyone was after them now. They were being hunted across the continent. She suspected that the traces of teleportation magic they had used might still be detectable. For that reason, they needed to leave the dungeon immediately. They had started walking again. As they neared the exit, Makoto had suddenly stepped in front of Minori, stopping her in her tracks. There, at the mouth of the dungeon, stood a colossal figure. Its eyes glowed with a menacing light. Its breath steamed against the stone walls. It was a dragon, and it was charging a fireball. Makoto had grabbed Minori's hand and started running, pulling her with urgency. Minori had pleaded for them to go back inside the dungeon, but Makoto had shouted that they needed to go the other way, outside. As they dashed forward, a terrifying sight awaited them. The dragon had already begun charging a fireball in its throat. In a flash, it released the attack. The ground exploded in flames, but both Makoto and Minori narrowly evaded the blast by leaping forward. The dragon ascended, its wings tearing through the sky, while flames continued to spread beneath it. As they stood to their feet and looked skyward, Makoto muttered in disbelief, questioning why a top-tier creature was outside the dungeon. The beast circled above them menacingly. Sensing something terrible was about to happen, Makoto instinctively pulled Minori into his arms and began to run. He told her there was no way they could stand against such a monster, and that they had to flee. The dragon charged again, another fireball building in its throat. When it released the blast, it narrowly missed them, searing the ground beside them. As they ran, Makoto spotted what looked like a town ahead. He wondered aloud if that was truly what it appeared to be. Minori mentioned that she had heard dragon species typically didn't attack human settlements, but that idea was shattered in the next instant. The dragon fired upon the buildings, causing massive explosions and engulfing the area in flames. Minori stared at the destruction, her expression filled with disbelief. The reality of the creature before them was grim. The flames it breathed exceeded 3,000 degrees, hot enough to melt anything. Its scales could deflect cannon fire. According to what they knew, only when several top guilds joined forces did anyone even consider the possibility of fighting a dragon. Both siblings froze beneath the hovering creature, its presence overwhelming. Makoto, panicked, gritted his teeth and wondered how they could possibly escape. Then, as the dragon loomed above, he looked at Minori with fierce determination and told her they had no choice. They had to do it. Minori, confused, asked what he meant. Makoto replied coldly that they needed to defeat the dragon and level up. Her eyes widened in shock, struggling to process what she had just heard. But Makoto reminded her of their promise, that if they kept running from a dragon, they would never be able to defeat Kira. With resolve hardening her heart, Minori clenched her fists. They locked eyes, silent but determined. Then Makoto leapt up into a tree and called out that he would go left. Minori responded that she would circle from the right. As the dragon charged another blast, it launched a fireball toward Makoto. He dodged it swiftly and then placed a mask over his face. A black and red aura surged around him as he activated his body enhancement ability. With remarkable precision, he leapt into the air and got behind the dragon, muttering that it shouldn't think it was the only one capable of fighting midair. Charging power into his fist, Makoto aimed for the dragon's head, the most likely weak spot, and threw a heavy punch. It only slightly tilted the creature's head. His own hand, however, was shredded, bleeding profusely from the impact. Makoto was stunned. He had never felt such hardness before. At that moment, Minori closed in from behind the dragon. She aimed for a gap between its scales with her blade, but even that did nothing. Her attack didn't even leave a scratch. The dragon turned toward her, and fear flooded her face. Then, with a swift strike of its tail, it sent her flying. Makoto, still in the tree, saw it and cried out her name. Enraged, he charged at the dragon. But just as he closed the distance, the dragon launched a fire blast that completely engulfed him. Minori screamed, calling out to her brother. The dragon then turned its attention toward her. Its eyes blazed red and black, charging up another flame attack. Minori attempted to block it with her shield, pouring all her strength into it, but the breath attack shattered her defense. The fire burned her arm violently. As the black and red flames devoured her skin, she dropped to her knees in pain. She wondered if the black flames were capable of burning through magic itself. Despite the searing agony, she remembered her fallen clones, the lives lost for their sake. She gritted her teeth, took up her blade, and shouted with fury that they had to get stronger. Without hesitation, she sliced off her own burning arm to stop the spread of the cursed flame. The fire continued to burn the land around them as Minori stood firm before the hovering dragon. Behind her, Mikoto regenerated and slowly stood up. She turned to see him, stunned at how fast he had recovered. Mikoto stood tall, even with blood covering him, and said that it wasn't over yet. Looking at the stump where his arm had been, he remarked that, as expected of a dragon's breath, it was the first time flames had melted his bones. Then, with grim determination, he ripped off both of his own arms. Using his body manipulation ability, he launched the severed arms toward the dragon, both forming tightly clenched fists. The fists struck the dragon with force, finally causing a reaction. Mikoto then called out to Minori that this was her chance. Minori, now behind the dragon again, prepared a stronger spell. She called out that this time it would be different, and then hurled a blast of black flame magic at the dragon's neck. The beast roared in agony as the flames exploded across its scales. Its mouth was dripping with blood now, and it ground its teeth in rage. But before it could retaliate, Mikoto jumped into the air once more and shouted, "Gather." His dismembered arms began to merge back with his body. Mikoto had realized something. Fist power alone couldn't destroy dragon scales. So he focused all his strength into one attack. By compressing his body, he reshaped his arm into a drill-like weapon. With immense force, he lunged at the dragon again and drove the weaponized limb into its head. Blood burst from the impact. The dragon shrieked and collapsed. Sometime later, Mikoto sat on the beast's massive corpse, breathing heavily. Minori was seated beside it. Mikoto took a long sigh of relief. They had done it. They had killed a dragon. He admitted that he felt like throwing up. Turning to Minori, he asked about the power she'd used earlier. Minori explained that it seemed like absorbing the dragon's flames had awakened something in her abilities. Mikoto grinned with awe and joy. He told her that it was amazing. As they stood and looked toward the distant town, Mikoto voiced his concern about the dragon's appearance. Minori said it hadn't been there when she passed through earlier. That's when Mikoto told her something important. He believed the dragon had been controlled. Minori was shocked and asked how that could be possible. Mikoto replied that there had been a faint pink light in the dragon's eyes, the same light that had appeared when Sajiri had cast a spell on Minori before. He didn't tell her outright, but in his heart, Mikoto had already realized it had to be Sajiri. Minori pieced it together anyway. Her voice trembled with rage and fear as she cried out that only a wicked woman like Sajiri Aya could control such a ferocious creature with hypnosis. Suddenly, black shapes began appearing in the sky. At first, Mikoto and Minori thought they were crows, but as they looked closer, they realized in horror that they were dragons, dozens of them, flying in formation. At the head of the flight, riding on a massive red dragon, were two men in black cloaks, each armed with a sword. One of them, a blonde-haired man, sat atop the dragon, while the other stood beside him as the beast soared through the air. The two figures had leapt down from the dragon and landed on the ground with smooth, precise, and stylish grace. Minori and Mikoto stood still, watching them intently. Mikoto's jaw was clenched, sweat visibly forming on his face in panic. The moment he saw the blades in their hands and the strange pink glow in their eyes, Minori voiced her suspicion, wondering if these people too were under control. Mikoto confirmed it. He believed they were. In the blink of an eye, the gray-haired man lunged toward Minori with blinding speed, attempting to stab her with his sword. She barely managed to block the strike with her blade. Mikoto called out to her, alarmed, but before he could do anything else, the blonde-haired man came charging from behind, his sword ready to strike Mikoto. Mikoto had tried to dodge and retaliated with a hard punch to the man's face, knocking him down, but he wasn't quick enough. The sword grazed him, slicing through a small portion of his cheek. As the blonde attacker fell, Makoto instinctively looked up to the sky, only for his eyes to widen in fear. Hovering above was the colossal red dragon, charging a fire attack in its mouth, its flames far more powerful than those of the earlier dragon. Both Minori and Makoto managed to dodge the blast, but the attack scorched the entire area, burning the ground and vaporizing the mud beneath their feet. Seeing the devastation, Makoto muttered under his breath that the dragon's attack was a wide-area breath blast, like the one from earlier. Minori realized that this must mean their location had already been exposed, and Makoto agreed. Probably. Within seconds, the remaining soldiers atop the dragons began to descend, landing with blades drawn. Makoto exhaled and told Minori that he would take care of the dragons, asking her to focus on the hunters. Minori questioned whether all the hunters were being controlled too, and Makoto confirmed it. Yes, they were. He stepped in front of her and offered an apology, telling her he regretted making her endure such pain. That was why he said she should stay back. Minori watched silently as Makoto began walking forward. He stated that he would handle everything by himself. Sweat rolled down her cheek as her expression clouded with sorrow. She asked him if he was truly sure about this, if he really intended to shoulder everything alone. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Closing her eyes, Minori remembered the cruel torture her clones had suffered at the hands of Ishiki and Kira. The memory stung. When she opened her eyes again, she reached out and grabbed Makoto by the arm, telling him to wait. She confessed that she had leaned too much on his strength, on his kindness, but she believed that wasn't right. She didn't want her brother to bear everything alone anymore. On hearing this, Makoto smiled gently. Both of them stood tall together, united by purpose, ready to exact their revenge. With resolute expressions, they activated their abilities and moved forward in unison. Minori summoned her Flamenry power, conjuring a fireball in her hand and launching it toward the enemy. In an instant, 3 hunters were hit and went down in flames. Makoto, meanwhile, sprinted ahead, weaving through the chaos, charging directly toward the dragon. The dragon began forming a massive blue orb in its mouth. When it fired, the energy beam pierced through Makoto's body, slicing him in two. But Makoto reacted instantly, activating his body manipulation ability. He sent his severed lower half flying toward the dragon, which swallowed it whole. That was exactly what he had planned. The moment the dragon closed its jaws, Makoto activated his poison enchant ability. The portion of his body inside the beast transformed into a toxic agent, and the dragon recoiled, violently spitting it out. While still in midair, Makoto landed and began walking away, fists clenched as the poisoned dragon thrashed behind him and collapsed. His power surged sharply as his aura intensified. Elsewhere, Minori continued fighting the hunters. She engulfed one in flames, while another came at her with a sword. She dodged swiftly, then apologized to the next hunter before hurling a flame bullet at him. Suddenly, other hunters from a distance began launching magical energy spheres at her. Minori raised a magical shield and deflected them, but the attacks came from above, fast and without pause. There seemed to be no end to the barrage. Then, in a split second, one of the hunters appeared behind her and drove a blade through her stomach. It pierced all the way through, and blood sprayed from her mouth. As the blade was withdrawn, Minori staggered and began falling to the ground. Surrounded by too many enemies, she could no longer hold them off. But her eyes suddenly blazed, violently, uncontrollably. She knew she couldn't afford to hold back. She activated her ultimate move, Flamme Noire Éclatée. A colossal black aura erupted around her, radiating overwhelming heat and power. She incinerated the surrounding hunters in one swift, devastating sweep. Yet even as they burned, they didn't stop. They were being controlled. Minori, tearfully, pleaded with them to stop, saying that if they got treatment quickly, there wouldn't be permanent damage. But her words meant nothing. Through watery eyes, she watched in horror as the scorched hunters staggered back to their feet, walking like zombies. Despite their wounds, despite the fire, they kept going. Minori could barely comprehend it. She trembled and cried, asking what the hell was going on. It dawned on her with chilling clarity. The hypnosis magic enforced absolute obedience. Even with such brutal injuries, the hunters continued to follow orders. The burning men slowly turned their heads, and after a moment of silence, began walking away, still ablaze. Minori watched them retreat, stunned and horrified, wondering where they were going now. On the opposite side, Makoto observed that the dragons he had fought were also beginning to withdraw. Two of them sat face to face, and lines of soldiers stood motionless, forming a ceremonial row as though awaiting someone's arrival. A pink portal materialized. Makoto clenched his teeth in frustration. Minori muttered that it had to be her. Out of the portal stepped Sajiri. She smirked as she told them she had found them. Makoto noted that he couldn't sense Kira's presence. Sajiri had come alone. He moved in front of Minori protectively and asked Sajiri if she truly felt confident coming here by herself. Then he demanded to know how she had tracked them. Sajiri, stroking the dragon beside her, explained that she could share her senses with anyone she hypnotized. She added, almost lazily, that while she disliked doing it, since it was exhausting, she had done it nonetheless. Makoto clenched his fist and asked if she had really dared come here without Kira. She had guts. Sajiri laughed and told him mockingly that she had already concluded they wouldn't be a challenge for her. Minori activated her power and declared that the next strike would be fatal. She launched a blow, casting her flamme noire ability toward Sajiri. But Sajiri merely smiled. With an effortless command, she ordered her hypnotized hunters to step in front of the attack. They did, and the flames struck them instead, shielding her completely. As the burning men screamed, Sajiri stood behind them, unfazed, and remarked darkly how convenient human shields were. Minori, now in full rage, shouted furiously that first it was Seiya Ishiki, and now Sajiri. She sobbed and asked Sajiri what she thought the value of life was. Sajiri activated her wand, surrounded now by frozen crystals, and muttered, "Human life." Without hesitation, she shattered a hunter's body into bloody chunks, the remains splattering on the battlefield. She stated with chilling indifference that human life meant nothing to her. Minori stared in shock and fear. Then, with a twisted smile, Sajiri said that as long as she was beautiful and strong, that was all that mattered. Everything else was just garbage. Minori stepped forward, still crying, and declared that there should be no hierarchy in human life. Sajiri's expression turned cold and mocking. She taunted Minori, asking whether it wasn't nice to be a naive little princess. Then she offered to crush that sweet little ideal. Blue lightning erupted around them as Sajiri activated her spell. She asked them, with cruel playfulness, if she should crush them into a mess. Minori and Makoto prepared for battle once more, taking their stances. Something terrible was about to be unleashed. With a cruel glance, Sajiri activated her spell, Thunderbolt Salted Chicken Dragon Meat. A surge of pink lightning exploded across the ground, cracking it apart. Minori found herself drifting away from Makoto as the battlefield shifted. Makoto called out her name again and again. Minori was seated on a section of the stone that was rapidly descending. She looked back, screaming for her brother. Then, suddenly, Sajiri appeared behind Makoto, placing her hand over his face. His eyes went wide in alarm as she whispered, asking if he shouldn't be worrying about himself instead. As he turned his head slightly toward her, she leaned in and used her temptation hypnosis ability. She kissed him. From the crumbling ground below, Minori looked up and screamed. Her heart shattered. There was no way this could be happening. Sajiri had hypnotized Makoto, and now she was kissing him, savoring it. Minori stood frozen, her breath trembling, as she witnessed everything unravel before her eyes. Makoto was unconscious, clearly hypnotized. The faint pink glow in his eyes confirmed it. He was under Sajiri's control. Tears streamed down Minori's face as she realized what had become of him. Sajiri remained behind Makoto, hugging him tightly, her expression twisted with a dark sense of possession. Placing her hand on Makoto's face, she remarked with mock sympathy that he seemed quite lucky. She commented cruelly that he could preserve his youth forever, without lifting a finger. Then, her expression darkened further. With sickening satisfaction, Sajiri licked Makoto's face. Watching it unfold, Minori's sorrow erupted into fury. With a sharp cry, she leapt upward from below, pointing her blade at Sajiri and warning her not to touch her brother. But even as Minori thrust her blade forward with the intent to stab, Sajiri did not move. She simply smiled. A moment later, Minori felt her sword pierce flesh, but it wasn't Sajiri's. Makoto had stepped between them. He was still under control, and Minori had unknowingly stabbed her own brother. Her face twisted in shock and fear. She hung suspended midair, frozen by what she had done. Makoto's body began to regenerate almost immediately. Sajiri mocked her with a delighted tone, teasing that Minori had gone and stabbed her brother right in the stomach. "What a naughty girl," she purred. Overcome with rage, Minori attempted to strike again. But Sajiri, unbothered, calmly spun her wand and activated her hypnosis once more. Controlling Makoto, she made him attack his own sister. Makoto threw a punch at Minori, who barely dodged in time. Backing up a step, Minori shouted at him to wake up. She asked him desperately whether he didn't recognize his own sister. Sajiri cut in, stating coldly that it was pointless. She explained that no one but herself could break the hypnosis unless it was overwritten with stronger magic, or unless the caster was killed. She then told Minori to fight. With that, she made Makoto land a kick against his sister. Minori blocked it with her arm, but the force sent her flying. Before she could recover in the air, Makoto was already there, his speed terrifying. Face to face, he struck again, sending her crashing into a large stone. The impact cracked the surface behind her. Sajiri, amused, asked mockingly how it felt to be hit by her own beloved brother. As Minori's regeneration began, she realized with growing dread that Makoto was far too strong. If she didn't fight back soon, she wouldn't survive. She rose slowly, blade trembling in her hand. Makoto continued stepping forward toward her. She apologized softly to him. Then, igniting her blade with black flames, she entered her combat stance. Makoto approached with a sinister, controlled expression until, for a moment, his face changed. He smiled childishly and called out to his sister in a gentle tone. Hearing it, Minori's heart softened. She let down her guard. In that instant, Makoto lunged and struck with a knee. Though Minori blocked it with her elbow, the sheer force sent her spinning away. She hit the ground hard. As Makoto advanced toward her again, Minori, sitting on the ground, trembled. She admitted to herself that she couldn't bring herself to fight him. But Makoto showed no hesitation. He reached her and stabbed her, lifting her into the air. Blood poured from her mouth as she hung there, stunned. Minori asked herself in despair what she should do now. Then, through the pain and confusion, her memories resurfaced, of Makoto standing against everyone to protect her, of him rubbing her head with his hand, of the warm smile he gave her. She remembered the moment they both cried after escaping Kira, mourning their fallen clones, and the day they promised to become stronger, together. Minori's eyes regained their strength. Though still suspended by Makoto's grip on her neck, she clenched her fists. Sajiri asked what she was muttering about. Without answering, Minori grabbed Makoto's wrist. Her face contorted with fury. She declared in rage that she would kill Sajiri. That was her promise. She shouted it with all her soul and then called Sajiri an old hag. Sajiri's demeanor immediately changed. Her expression warped with fury, her eyes wide and monstrous. She screamed for Makoto to crush Minori. As Makoto raised his arm, Minori acted first. She punched his arm clean off, freeing herself. When Makoto attempted to strike again with his other arm, she dodged, whispering an apology under her breath. With that, Minori activated her ultimate ability. A massive ball of black magic began forming in her hand, filled with destructive energy. The black flames expanded outward, flooding the battlefield. Sajiri, alarmed, quickly activated a magic shield to protect herself. She muttered that the attack had nearly hit her. Meanwhile, Minori fell to one knee, breathing heavily. In her thoughts, she reflected that she had always just followed behind her brother. She had believed that Mikoto would somehow take care of everything. But that wasn't enough anymore. She steadied herself, gathered her power, and charged forward with incredible speed. Blade in hand, she stabbed Mikoto several times in succession, cutting through his arms, severing his head, slicing his body apart. But even headless, Mikoto kept fighting. His punch landed hard against Minori, who blocked it, but the force sent her skidding back across the ground. Mikoto's regeneration accelerated rapidly, and his pink-tinged eyes still glowed faintly. Minori realized something then. Through the weight and rhythm of his attacks, she could feel what he was trying to say.
He was sorry.
And she admitted to herself that maybe she was the one who should be apologizing because she was weak, always depending on him. But she told herself that it was okay now. With that, she launched another assault. Her determination surged with every blow she delivered. As her attacks landed, her power level rose higher and higher. Both of them clashed, going all out, power versus power, sibling against sibling. And then, in the heat of battle, Minori stopped. She dropped her blade and embraced Mikoto tightly. "I'll save you, big brother," she whispered. And in that moment, she unleashed her black flames. A devastating explosion engulfed the two of them. Sajiri, floating above and watching, sneered. She muttered that Minori had lost her mind. This was self-destruction. Her face twisted with delight. Pink aura swirling around her, she laughed in triumph, pleased that both Mikoto and Minori's blood would now be hers. But she clicked her tongue in irritation when the thick smoke concealed everything. She grumbled that she couldn't see and wanted to collect their bodies already. Then a voice echoed through the haze. Minori's voice. She told Sajiri that she was mistaken about one thing. Sajiri flinched, sweat forming on her brow. Through the fading smoke, Minori stepped forward. She asked Sajiri how she could possibly think Minori would fight against her own brother. Minori explained that when they escaped from that prison hell, she and Mikoto had killed each other countless times, training themselves to the brink. She had long since prepared for this. Her aura blazed brilliantly, intimidating and vast. Sajiri stood frozen, unable to respond. Then, from within the smoke, another figure emerged. It was Mikoto. He stood tall beside Minori. He looked at her and thanked her sincerely. Together, brother and sister stood side by side, their bodies glowing, their presence overwhelming. Mikoto told her that he had believed in her all along. They took their battle stances once more, radiant aura pouring from them in waves. Now it was their turn to strike back. Minori and Mikoto began stepping forward toward Sajiri, their glowing aura radiating power. Sajiri stood still, her expression tight with anxiety, as sweat formed along her forehead. She wondered in disbelief whether the explosion had really broken Mikoto's hypnosis. Trying to mask her unease with a smile, she told herself that if that was the case, she only needed to put them back under her control again. Without hesitation, Sajiri raised her wand and cast a powerful spell. Under its influence, the fallen hunters began to rise again, their movements stiff, their eyes faintly glowing with pink light. Even the dragon, once thought defeated, stirred once more and climbed back onto its feet, its massive form trembling under the force of magic. Sajiri summoned all the controlled hunters and the dragon to charge at Minori and Mikoto. As one of the hunters rushed toward Mikoto, Minori quickly stepped in, blocking the strike with her blade. Their weapons clashed, and a contest of brute strength followed as both struggled to overpower the other. Meanwhile, Mikoto launched himself into the air and, with a devastating kick, slammed another hunter's head into the ground. Then, without a moment's rest, Mikoto darted forward and confronted the dragon directly. It began to gather fire in its throat. Before it could launch the attack, Minori stepped in front of Mikoto once more and held up her magical shield, absorbing the brunt of the flame. While holding the shield in one hand, she clenched her sword in the other and activated her black fire ability. With a swift, decisive movement, she severed the dragon's head using her special technique, Flamme Noire, Black Wedding Slash. After the beast fell, Minori and Mikoto stood side by side, now directly facing Sajiri, who mocked them by saying it was all pointless. Lifting her wand once more, she spread her hands wide and reanimated even more dead hunters. She taunted the siblings, saying that these hypnotized people no longer felt pain and would continue moving until their hearts stopped. Bloodied and broken, the hypnotized soldiers moved like lifeless corpses toward the siblings. Minori and Mikoto stood back to back, watching the oncoming tide. Mikoto warned her that if they didn't finish them properly, they'd just keep getting up again, just like zombies. Minori clutched her blade and admitted that perhaps they themselves weren't much better. As another hunter lunged at them, Mikoto ducked and delivered a crushing punch to the enemy's face, blood spraying from the hunter's mouth. But even as the hunter collapsed, he began to laugh unnaturally and turned toward Mikoto again, unfazed. Minori then told Mikoto that it wasn't just the magic controlling them, it was something darker. She insisted that they had to be knocked out fully. Mikoto nodded, clenched his teeth, and went to work. He moved with deadly precision, slicing one hunter's neck just enough to disable him, then shifted smoothly and uppercut another straight into unconsciousness. But as they fought, more and more of the hypnotized swarmed them. Mikoto commented on the overwhelming numbers. Just then, the dragon descended from the sky and crushed Mikoto beneath its giant foot. Sajiri stood triumphantly on the dragon's head. Minori cried out for her brother in shock. Sajiri, meanwhile, invoked her temptation hypnosis on Mikoto, declaring arrogantly that no one could resist her magic. She analyzed the situation, stating aloud that after everything, their stamina and magical reserves must be nearly drained. Standing behind Mikoto as he knelt, she placed her hand on his face and ordered him to destroy Minori, to smash her into pieces. Mikoto began to step forward, head lowered, seemingly under her control again. But then he paused. Sitting down on the ground, he activated a red glow that radiated from his body and clenched his fist tightly. Sajiri shouted at him, asking what he was waiting for. Suddenly, without warning, Mikoto turned and punched Sajiri square in the face, sending her flying as blood burst from her mouth. She landed on the ground, tumbling backward, her face contorted in disbelief. From where she lay, Sajiri looked up at the siblings in horror. Mikoto taunted her, saying her hypnosis didn't work anymore. She crawled in the dirt, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Minori stepped forward and coldly told her that she had already surpassed Sajiri. Sajiri, now bleeding and wide-eyed, screamed that it was impossible. She asked how Minori had managed to overwrite her hypnosis. Still shouting impossible again and again, she rose to her feet and began flinging curses wildly, activating every spell she could. The blasts crashed into the earth, stirring up a great dust cloud. But when the smoke cleared, Minori and Mikoto were still standing, unharmed, a brilliant magical shield surrounding them. Sajiri screamed at them to die, but Minori calmly replied that she wouldn't be dying today. Sajiri's face twisted in fury as she screamed for Minori to shut up. Her voice grew monstrous as she raised her wand and cast more spells into the sky. Her hatred boiled over, and she unleashed her ultimate attack, Meteor Ray, Falling Star Prison. Bright projectiles rained down from the heavens toward them. Yet even this barrage failed to penetrate Minori's shield. The flames danced across its surface harmlessly. Minori declared that Sajiri's magic could no longer touch her. Then Minori began her incantation. A powerful darkness radiated from her as she activated Flamme Noire, Black Flame, and launched the blazing energy directly at Sajiri. Desperate, Sajiri conjured her Swell's ice shield, a glowing blue barrier. But as the black flame collided, the ice cracked, then shattered entirely. The black fire consumed Sajiri. She screamed in agony, her skin beginning to melt as the fire spread over her body. Her once beautiful features, her pride, were now vanishing into ash and pain. Mikoto, watching calmly, asked if burning hurt a lot. Minori approached her slowly and said that she had felt this pain too many times. She reached Sajiri and slapped her hard, stating that it was all because of her magic. But she also added that the pain and suffering she and Mikoto had endured was far worse. Sajiri, shaking and overwhelmed by terror, stared up at Minori. The overwhelming magic, the pure presence of the siblings, had shattered her spirit. Minori looked down at her with fury and said that it was time for Sajiri to feel it herself. With that, she placed her hand on Sajiri's forehead and began casting a spell, a permanent hypnosis, one from which there would be no awakening. She told Sajiri to enjoy it to her heart's content. And as Sajiri's consciousness was swallowed by the magic, she opened her eyes to find herself in a room she recognized. Her heartbeat quickened, eyes darting as confusion turned to dread. Only moments ago, she had been fighting Minori and Mikoto. But now, she was back inside the cube. The same cube she had once used to torture them, where she had strung them up over spinning fan blades, slicing them apart endlessly. Now it was her turn, and the nightmare was only beginning. As Sajiri realized where she was, terror overwhelmed her. Her heart pounded as she recognized the cursed chamber, the cube where she had once tortured Minori and Mikoto. She wondered in horror why she was back there. Overcome with panic, she screamed and shouted to be let out, her voice trembling with fury and desperation. She kicked against the glass violently, but it was pointless. Nothing cracked. Nothing moved. She kept shouting at the top of her lungs, demanding someone, anyone, to release her from this nightmare. Desperate, Sajiri tried to activate her Thunderbolt Purple Lightning ability, thinking it might shatter the chains restraining her. But when no energy came forth, she froze in disbelief. She immediately attempted her Meteor Ball, Star Tail technique, then her Water Cutter, Water Clash, followed by her Wind Blade, Storm Edge, and finally, Ice Needle, Water Piercer. None of them worked. She was horrified. Her magic was completely sealed. After a brief silence, she let out a scream of sheer frustration and asked herself why her magic wasn't working. That was when she noticed Mikoto approaching the cube from outside. His presence startled her, and she immediately begged him to help her. Her eyes widened in terror as she realized it was truly him. She called out again, but Mikoto remained silent. He didn't say a word. He simply stood there unmoved. Then, slowly, he walked toward the machine that controlled the fans inside the cube. Sajiri watched in panic as he operated it. She couldn't understand what he was doing until it clicked. He was turning the machine on. She screamed at him to stop, pleading and yelling at him not to press the red button. But Mikoto did not listen. Without hesitation, he pressed it. The fan beneath her roared to life, and she immediately began to descend. The blades below began shredding her body, and she cried out in agony. Blood splattered violently within the cube as the fan tore through her lower half. Her flesh was mangled, ripped apart. Only her upper body remained as she screamed repeatedly that it hurt. The machine continued ripping through her limbs, arms, and torso until all that remained were scattered bloody fragments. Chains held the last remnants of her twitching hand as her shredded body fell apart. Then, all at once, Sajiri's eyes snapped open. She gasped, horrified. She questioned what she had just experienced, though the pain had been all too real. As she blinked, she saw Mikoto once again, standing there silently, just as before. She wondered if she had returned. But Mikoto didn't say a word. She began to beg him again, humbling herself, pleading for mercy. She told him she would do anything, just to be released from this nightmare. But Mikoto merely raised his hand and pointed at something. Her gaze followed it and landed on the machine's gauge, the blood value level. It displayed 0000 as the current value. Right beside it, the total value glowed, 9698. She stared at the number in disbelief as the dial began to rise again. Her heart sank. She realized this was the same total, the same number of times Minori and Mikoto had been pierced inside this very machine. As the blades powered up again, she screamed for Makoto to stop. He remained expressionless and silent. The cycle resumed. Her body was once again torn to shreds. Her blood splattered across the cube walls. Her voice rang out in horror. She begged to be freed, but it was useless. Again and again, the same scene played out, each time more agonizing than the last. Eventually, the blood gauge reached 96-97, just one step away from completion. Sajiri stared at it, with trembling hope. She convinced herself that if the counter reached its total, this punishment would end. She waited, breath held. Finally, the dial clicked to 9,698, and then reset to 0000. Sajiri screamed in anguish. She kicked and thrashed against the glass in fury, shouting why, again and again. She was desperate to understand why the loop hadn't ended. It was supposed to stop. But Makoto, without speaking, pressed the start button once more. The machine resumed, and the blade spun again. Her voice shattered the air with another scream as blood filled the cube once more. Outside this illusion, Minori remained seated beside Sajiri's physical body, maintaining the hypnosis spell. Makoto stood nearby, watching the sight unfold. He was disturbed by the sight of Sajiri's true form. Her body had withered into a skeletal husk. There was barely any flesh left on her, only a terrifying skull-like shell. Makoto quietly realized what had happened. Sajiri had used Baikirin's magic and technology to falsify her youth. Minori agreed. Judging by her appearance, they estimated that Sajiri had lived for over 150 years, sustained by the regenerative blood and bodily fluids of beings like them. Makoto now understood. That was why Sajiri had been so obsessed with the two of them. She had targeted them for their powers of regeneration. She needed them to maintain her illusion of beauty and youth. As Sajiri's body twitched and her mouth began to mutter something incoherent, Minori coldly stated that the pain Sajiri had endured was still far less than what they had suffered. She explained that Sajiri would now endure 10 times the pain they had. Even after all of this, Sajiri's obsession hadn't ended. Minori regarded her with pity and disgust. She whispered that what Sajiri was experiencing was a true demonstration of consequences, a real nightmare fitting for her crimes. Turning to Makoto, Minori asked him what they should do next. She reasoned that Sajiri would likely die of old age soon anyway, even if they left her as she was. There was no need for them to finish her off. The two of them began walking away. But after a short distance, Minori paused. Something caught her attention, a glint of light reflecting off Sajiri's broken form. She turned back and returned to investigate. Kneeling beside the body, she found a necklace. When she opened it, she found a picture inside, a little girl standing in front of a man. Her eyes narrowed. Minori whispered to herself that Sajiri had even manipulated fathers with children. Holding the necklace tightly in her hand, she thought to herself that they couldn't let Baikirin and Kira continue this cycle of suffering. Something had to change. This chain of sorrow had to end. She rejoined Makoto, and they resumed walking forward together. Behind them, Sajiri still clung to life. Her skull-like form trembled on the ground, barely breathing. She wondered to herself how much time had passed. Was it minutes? Hours? Days? She knew death was near. But then footsteps approached. Someone was coming. It was Kira. He walked up to her with a cruel smile, standing over her collapsed body. He told her that he had followed her magical presence and found her on the brink of death. He called her state pitiful. With trembling lips, Sajiri begged him. She asked him to kill her before she grew even older, her voice shaking from weakness. Kira leaned down and looked her in the eyes. Smirking, he asked why he should grant her wish. He told her he had no intention of doing so. Standing up again, he turned to walk away. As he left, he waved dismissively and told her that she could slowly wither away like the ugly old hag she had become. "Bye-bye, Grandma," he added mockingly over his shoulder. His figure grew smaller as he walked toward the horizon, his eyes lifting to the sunset in the distance. As he gazed forward, he sensed something, the trail of Makoto and Minori. A blue, radiant aura swirled around him. With quiet resolve, Kira muttered that those two wouldn't get far. The scene shifted to nighttime. Both Minori and Makoto were making their way through the dense jungle. They had walked for so long that exhaustion finally caught up to them. Deciding they needed a break, they set up a small fire and sat down beside it, resting their backs against the rough bark of nearby trees. Minori expressed happiness that they had made it this far, to which Makoto nodded quietly. As they rested, Makoto found himself reflecting on everything they had endured, the countless tortures, the painful memories, the battles that had scarred them both mentally and physically. So much had happened along the way, but each time, they had managed to level up, to push through. Minori, however, couldn't ignore the lingering sadness in her heart. She remembered the deaths of her clone sisters and of the many hunters they were forced to kill, those who had been manipulated by Sajiri. She mentioned that it saddened her to think how many lives they had trampled over to get this far, lives that had nothing to do with their revenge. She questioned aloud whether they had stepped over too many sacrifices. But she also said that it was almost over now. Makoto, clenching his teeth with frustration, agreed. There was only one left. Their final enemy, Haruto Kira. His expression grew darker. A black and red aura began to flare faintly around his body. He declared with grim determination that they would kill Kira and finally end their revenge. But for now, Makoto suggested they rest and plan their next move carefully. Suddenly, Makoto sensed something approaching. Alarmed, he told Minori to run. Confused, she asked what was wrong. But before either of them could react, a powerful blue blast crashed toward them from the darkness, obliterating the trees in its path. They barely managed to dodge it. Haruto Kira had arrived. Wielding his sword and smiling coldly, Kira walked through the shadows toward them. He greeted Makoto with a mocking, "Found you." Makoto quickly turned to Minori again, urging her to escape. But Minori refused. She pointed out that they were 2 against 1. She believed they might have a chance if they fought together. Makoto told her flatly that they couldn't win. Not like this. Not while they were still drained from the battle against Sajiri. They had to escape before Kira closed in. But Kira wasn't going to give them the chance. With a wicked grin, he lunged forward, his sword slicing through the air. Makoto tried to punch him, but Kira blocked the strike effortlessly with his blade. Their weapons clashed, and for a moment, they were locked in combat, flashes of energy erupting from the collision. Kira casually remarked that it had been a long time, and Makoto shouted back that Kira was the last person he had wanted to run into now. Kira only laughed and told him not to say something so sad. He added that it almost felt like they had returned to the old days. Then Kira reached behind his back, slowly unwrapping the white cloth that concealed his new weapon. He had been planning to toy with them a little longer, but now his mood had shifted. He said that he would erase Minori, and as he unveiled his new sword, both Minori and Makoto stared in horror. The blade was massive, longer than a standard sword, with an eerie purple hue and what looked like eyes embedded into its surface. Minori's hands flew to her mouth in shock. Makoto was visibly shaken, sweat beading across his forehead. Kira's tone darkened. He said Minori's escape to Seiya Ishiki's place had infuriated him, but he had come to a realization: erasing her from existence would bring him peace. Makoto exploded in anger. He shouted that Kira was going to kill his sister simply because he was angry? Just for that reason? Makoto roared that he would kill Kira for this. Fueled by rage, he lunged forward with a clenched fist. Kira blocked it again. As Kira dodged Makoto's next strike, Minori came at him from behind, attempting to stab him. But Kira turned swiftly and blocked her attack with ease. Makoto seized the opening and rushed in once more, finally landing a punch directly into Kira's ribs. For a brief second, he wondered if their attacks were actually affecting him. Minori activated her Flamme Noire, Porter Black Scripture, coating her blade in blazing black flames. She charged again, but once more, Kira blocked it with his cursed sword. Then Kira began to realize something. They were working together. Coordinated. Dangerous. As he stood firm, He activated a magical spell. His sword began to glow with an immense, evil purple aura. He muttered that he wasn't the only troublesome one here. Minori and Makoto were frozen. Kira moved instantly. In a single slash, he severed Makoto's arm. Blood sprayed into the air. Makoto stared in disbelief as his arm flew through the darkness, landing a short distance away. He tried to activate his regeneration, but nothing happened. His body wasn't healing. He screamed in pain as blood poured uncontrollably from the wound. His eyes widened and he realized he couldn't move. Panic and fear consumed him. Minori screamed his name and ran toward him. But before she could reach him, Kira appeared behind her and delivered a brutal kick to her neck, sending her flying backward. She crashed violently into a tree and collapsed. Kira stood over them, clutching the sword. Undead Killer 1. The Sword of the Immortal Slayer. A cursed weapon that nullified regeneration. Any wound inflicted by it could never be healed again. This was no ordinary blade, not like the toys Kira had once used. This was the real deal. Makoto, still on his knees, blood flooding the ground beneath him, shouted Kira's name with fury. But Kira simply chuckled, watching him suffer with that same twisted smile. Lifting his sword high, Kira began charging an enormous surge of energy. Makoto, unable to move, could only brace himself for what would surely be the final blow. And then, the sword came down. A spray of blood filled the air. But it wasn't Makoto who had been struck. Minori had thrown herself between them. The cursed blade pierced straight through her body. Blood splattered across Kira's face and Makoto's. Minori's arms wrapped around her brother as her blood flowed freely. Her lips trembled, as if to speak, but no words came. The forest fell silent once again. As Kira's blade cleaved through Minori's body, from her shoulder down, a burst of blood exploded into the air. Makoto saw her being torn in half before his eyes. Her broken body collapsed onto him, and in that moment, his eyes widened with shock and raw terror. He caught her as she fell, screaming her name, her blood soaking his arms and splashing across his face. Still clutching her, Makoto called out in agony. Minori tried to speak, her lips trembling faintly, but Makoto stopped her. He told her not to talk, urging her to save her strength. He gently laid her down on the forest floor, his voice shaking as he pleaded with her to hold on, that he would do something, anything, to save her. As he held her hand tightly in his, their fingers intertwined, the moon cast its pale light over them, turning the scene into something surreal and dreamlike. Minori muttered softly, attempting to say one last thing, but Makoto shouted, ordering her not to finish her sentence. His face contorted with grief, and tears streamed from his eyes as he desperately tried to deny the moment. Blood coated Minori's face and chest, yet she smiled sweetly and began to tell her brother she loved him. But before she could finish, Kira appeared behind her and swung his blade mercilessly, severing her head with a single slash. Her head flew into the air and landed several feet away. Makoto was frozen. His mouth trembled, his vision blurred, and he could do nothing but stare at her decapitated body still lying in his arms. Kira, grinning, casually apologized, saying that he really couldn't stand cheesy family moments. Makoto remained kneeling beside his sister's headless corpse, unable to speak, drowning in agony too heavy to form words. Kira stood nearby, his expression twisted in delight as he looked at the blood dripping from his blade. He admitted that he'd predicted this exact outcome, that if he aimed for Makoto, Minori would intervene. She always would. That thought alone had pleased him more than anything. He opened his arms wide and declared that maybe family bonds weren't so bad after all, at least when they served his purpose. Still kneeling, Makoto clutched what remained of his sister. His pupils were dilated in disbelief as Kira burst out into cruel laughter. Minori's head lay in the grass, her lifeless eyes open in the distance. Suddenly, the scene shifted to a warm, peaceful memory. Makoto sat inside a quiet home, wearing his black school uniform. He was seated at a table, ready to eat, while Minori stood nearby in a pink apron, holding a spoon in her hand. She asked gently if he was all right. Makoto, breaking from a brief daze, apologized and admitted he'd spaced out for a second. Minori handed him a rice bowl, reminding him that his food was getting cold. Makoto smiled and thanked her, taking it joyfully as he began to eat. A little while later, Minori stepped outside to hang the laundry in the sun, saying aloud that she had a good feeling about today. Back inside, Makoto washed the dishes and called out that they needed to leave or they'd be late. The siblings soon walked together through the village, heading down the stairs from a nearby park. Minori rushed ahead to catch up to Makoto. During their walk, Makoto mentioned that Yoshida wanted to invite her to the aquarium. Minori smirked. An aquarium, huh? Makoto asked if she didn't like them, but Minori explained that it wasn't that. It was just that they hadn't gone anywhere together in a while. Makoto apologized, saying he'd been caught up with work, trying to make things easier for their mother. Minori shook her head, clarifying that wasn't what she meant. Makoto then asked if she'd like to go to the aquarium with him sometime. Hearing that, Minori blushed and agreed. It was a promise. As they descended further down the stairs, they noticed a man approaching from the opposite direction. Minori asked if Makoto knew who he was. Makoto replied that he hadn't seen him before in the village. The man came to a stop and asked if they were Kiryu Makoto and Kiryu Minori. Makoto cautiously confirmed it. The man's expression lit up with joy. He said he had been looking for them. Minori asked why, and his face suddenly turned dark. With a cold voice, he answered that he had business with their bodies. Then, without hesitation, he lunged at them with a sword. Makoto instinctively moved to protect Minori. The blade slashed through his back, slicing his body in two before Minori's horrified eyes. Blood splattered across her face as Makoto's top half flew several feet away and his lower half fell limp. Minori screamed his name again and again, frozen in panic. Then, impossibly, Makoto's body began to regenerate. His bones reformed, then muscle and flesh, and finally skin. The pain of the process was excruciating, his face contorted in torment, drenched in sweat. Minori stared in terror, unable to understand what was happening. Kira, watching nearby, was overjoyed. He blushed with excitement, saying it was amazing. Makoto, disoriented, stared at his own hands in disbelief, trying to make sense of what just happened. Kira stepped forward and confirmed it. He couldn't believe Makoto had actually regenerated. Tears of twisted joy filled Kira's eyes. He admitted someone had told him about this, and now he knew they hadn't been lying. Minori knelt beside Makoto, asking him in fear if he was all right. Without hesitation, Kira took his stance again. He lunged forward and, in one clean motion, cut through both of their necks, severing their heads once more. Their bodies collapsed. Kira turned back and watched. Then, their regeneration began again. He laughed, calling it the truth. No matter how many times they were killed, they came back. Blood covered his face, but Kira only grinned. He said he hadn't believed that monsters like Minori and Makoto could exist. He walked toward them, calling them undead heirs of the immortals. Minori, trembling, asked what he meant by that. But Kira didn't answer. Instead, he resumed cutting them apart. He stepped on Makoto's severed head and laughed, saying they didn't need to know. For now, their bodies were all he needed. And so the torment continued. Again and again, Kira butchered them. Over and over, their blood painted the trees and the soil. Makoto and Minori cried out, their voices hoarse, their agony unimaginable. Eventually, Kira stood, soaked in blood, clutching both their mutilated torsos, one in each hand, as he walked forward. He smiled, declaring that he'd make good use of their bodies. Back in the present, Minori's corpse lay on the ground, her head severed from her body. Makoto, staring at her remains, felt something snap inside him. His mind flooded with images of Minori, her smiling face, her laughter, her tears. He remembered her clearly, sweet and full of life. He screamed and slammed his fist into a nearby tree, blood trickling from his knuckles as veins bulged across his arms. And then, Black flames erupted from his body. A violent surge of dark energy exploded outward, covering the surrounding forest in a blanket of infernal power. The air trembled under the weight of it. Kira leapt back, shocked. His eyes widened. He had never witnessed anything like it. Makoto stood, consumed in black fire, his crimson eyes glowing with rage. Flames roared around him, feeding off his fury, his loss, and his pain. A storm had awakened. As the flames swelled higher, Kira peered through the inferno and realized with horror that Makoto had transformed into a monstrous being. He questioned aloud, shielding himself behind cover, what kind of entity he was looking at. From his perspective, Makoto had morphed into something no longer human. His eyes blazed red, long horns curved out from his skull, and black flames roared around his body. Even his hair had grown long and wild, and his arms had taken on a grotesque, beast-like form. Kira muttered in disbelief, wondering what kind of form this was. Makoto stared directly at him. Then, in a surge of overwhelming rage and power, he released a scream so loud and forceful that Kira was pushed back by it. Kira realized, with deepening dread, that Makoto's magical energy had ascended to a completely different level. Even the echo of that scream was strong enough to blow trees apart. Turning his gaze to Minori's lifeless body, her head severed and lying beside her, Makoto approached and knelt beside her. Holding his 2 fingers above her, he began casting a golden magical spell. Kira, watching from a distance, was stunned to see Minori's head reattached to her body as golden light flowed through her. Makoto continued the spell, fully healing her body with immense magical power. Kira grit his teeth. He had been sure that his cursed sword had killed her beyond repair. As he stood hidden in the tree, watching Makoto work the spell, he questioned what this new skill was and what that monstrous transformation meant. Beads of sweat formed on his face as he silently admitted that this might be the final form of evolution for Makoto and Minori's species. Makoto, still in his transformed state, stood again. Kira said to himself that this wasn't supposed to happen. He didn't understand what kind of trick Makoto had used, but he decided that if he couldn't take Makoto down, he'd at least retrieve Minori. With that, he lunged from the tree with his sword in hand, aiming to end Makoto right then and there. But just as he swung his blade, Makoto and Minori vanished. Kira was caught off guard. He looked back, sensing something, and there they were. Makoto had already teleported behind him, setting Minori down gently. Kira narrowed his eyes and muttered that things were certainly becoming more interesting. In an instant, Makoto charged forward. Kira was momentarily frozen, but quickly dodged the incoming punch. As he shifted away, he managed to swing his sword and slice off a piece of Makoto's horned arm. Makoto landed and crouched low, his head turning slowly as his blazing red eyes locked onto Kira. Kira stood back, frustrated. He yelled that it was impossible, that he had killed Makoto over and over, dozens, hundreds, even thousands of times. He couldn't understand how Makoto kept getting stronger, seemingly fueled by the death of his sister. Grinding his teeth in rage, Kira's aura flared, black flames swirling violently around him. He sensed that something enormous was coming and raised his guard. Then, both warriors lunged at each other again with everything they had. They collided, their powers clashing violently. Makoto caught Kira's blade with his bare hand. The impact sent sparks flying. They separated, and Makoto delivered a fierce punch to Kira, who tried to block with his sword, but the force sent him crashing into a tree. Blood spilled from Kira's mouth as he struggled to rise. While gasping, Kira admitted that Makoto was the first person to ever cause him this much damage. He then drew another sword, its purple aura flickering to life. Kira warned Makoto not to get cocky. Now dual-wielding, Kira entered a battle stance, his aura darker than before. He claimed that Makoto was nothing more than an undead immortal and questioned how he ever thought he could challenge someone like him. With eyes wide and furious, Kira prepared for another clash. Makoto, his aura blazing brighter than ever, stood his ground and sighed. The next clash was a blur, blades and fists exchanged in rapid fury. Makoto began gathering black flames into his hands, forming a ball of condensed magic. Kira instinctively placed his sword in front of him for protection. When the attack hit, Makoto's casual blade shattered, and Kira was sent flying once more. Kira used the momentum of a nearby tree to stop himself and shoved his feet into the ground for stability. With an intense gaze, he tightened his grip on his sword. Kira then lunged again and managed to cut Makoto across the chest. Not satisfied, he yelled, "Not yet," and launched a second attack. Gathering even more energy into his sword, he fell from the sky with it raised overhead, ready to end it once and for all. But Makoto, calm and composed, healed himself midair with a golden glowing spell. Kira, still in freefall, shouted in disbelief and questioned what was happening. Makoto completed the healing, fully restoring himself, and once again cloaked his body in black flames. As Kira fell toward him, he tried to kick Makoto, but the blow was caught. Makoto countered and sent him rolling violently across the ground. Kira landed hard, his sword buried in the earth nearby. Blood covered his face. He looked up toward Makoto and wondered, in bitter disbelief, if he was truly going to die in such a state. His body refused to rise, and as he groaned in agony, he muttered that this wasn't how it was supposed to end. Meanwhile, Minori slowly opened her eyes. Disoriented, she questioned where she was. Then, in horror, she watched as something struck Makoto and sent him flying. She turned her gaze upward and saw it. Kira, now airborne, had transformed as well. Half of his body had taken on a monstrous shape. One leg and one arm were coated in thick, bony armor, and a single horn jutted out from the side of his skull. His expression was twisted with sadistic joy. Hovering in the sky, Kira looked down at them and asked with a devilish grin, "What do you think of this?" Makoto and Minori stared up at Kira, who floated above the battlefield, his body radiating with an overwhelming purple aura. As he descended and landed on the ground, the pressure around him intensified. Minori instinctively touched her neck, wondering if she hadn't already been killed by that mighty sword. Confused, she turned toward Makoto, her thoughts tangled. What was going on? When she caught sight of her brother's monstrous form, she hesitated and asked him whether it was really him. Kira, now grounded, looked down at his hand. He hadn't expected things to reach this point. He had never intended to reveal that form. His frustration deepened as his power surged again, and his aura flourished more violently around him. Taking a stance with his sword drawn, Kira called out to the siblings, demanding whether they were truly ready to bear the cost of defying him. In an instant, Makoto and Kira clashed. Their raging auras collided as they charged at each other, the impact creating a blinding golden explosion. The field around them became a whirlwind of black and purple, and Minori stood frozen amidst it all, unable to make out what was happening due to the overwhelming light. Up above, Makoto and Kira traded blows. Kira charged, sword raised, and was moments away from slicing through Makoto. But Makoto stopped him by grabbing his arms. Then, channeling his monstrous energy, Makoto gathered a massive black flame in his mouth and unleashed it at close range. The force of it sent Kira flying skyward. From above, Kira retaliated by diving down, sword in hand. As he swung at Makoto, Makoto deflected the strike with his bare hand and attempted to counter with a punch. Kira moved quickly and landed a punch of his own. Though Makoto blocked it, the impact hurled him backwards. He steadied himself by digging his claws into the earth. Fueled by rage, Makoto lunged at Kira again and bit into his shoulder, tearing flesh while restraining him by the arms. Blood burst forth from Kira's wound. Enraged, Kira retaliated with a vicious swing of his sword, severing Makoto's head from his body. With an icy expression, he coldly mocked Makoto, saying that if cutting flesh and breaking bone was Makoto's specialty, then perhaps he'd appreciate the irony. Kira stood over Makoto's headless body, clutching his sword, and muttered that even immortals would die if decapitated by his cursed blade. With dark satisfaction, he sneered and asked Makoto what it felt like to experience true death. Then, he laughed wickedly toward the sky. But his laughter faded as a glow of golden magic lit the battlefield. Kira turned, his eyes widening as Makoto began using the same divine healing spell he had once used to save Minori. The impossible was happening. Makoto's severed head was reattaching to his body. Recognizing the magic circle, Kira froze. He stared in disbelief, then realization hit him like a thunderbolt. The healing spell was reversing time itself. Black flames ignited from Makoto's neck as his red eyes reignited with life and fury. Makoto coughed up blood as he reawakened. Kira landed back on the ground, trembling with disbelief. He growled that such a technique couldn't possibly be used so easily or repeatedly. But Makoto stood tall, unbothered, ready once again. As both of them took their stances, Kira raised his sword high. A catastrophic surge of power came down from the heavens, fusing with his blade. He warned Makoto that this was the same technique that had once slain the Flame Hell Demon Lord. With it, Makoto would be obliterated. But Makoto remained composed. Drawing in black flames, he formed a condensed sphere of raw energy in his palm. Both warriors surged toward each other with full power. Kira screamed for Makoto to be annihilated. Their clash rocked the landscape. Black and pink energy collided violently. Despite Kira's strength, Makoto managed to stop the incoming blade with his bare hand. But the force of Kira's attack was tremendous. It severed Makoto's arm, sending him crashing to the ground. Just then, Minori rushed in from behind. She placed her glowing hand on Makoto's back and cried out to him, calling him Big Brother. The warmth of her power surged into Makoto's broken body. That moment triggered something deep within Makoto. He looked up and thanked Minori. His eyes gleamed even redder than before, and his strength soared. Rising again, Makoto grabbed Kira's sword with one hand. Kira responded by pouring all his might into his weapon. Their battle was now at its peak, both sides equal, both unstoppable. Kira shouted in frustration, recalling how he had killed Makoto and Minori over and over, again and again. He growled that even if he killed them in the past, he would do it again in the present. He claimed it was fate, but Minori shouted back that she would destroy that fate, again and again if she had to. Makoto's eyes glinted. He said calmly that he would change their destiny. In that instant, Minori channeled her full power into Makoto. Together, they launched an overwhelming black energy wave at Kira. It struck him with terrifying force, lifting him into the sky. The resulting explosion was visible from far beyond the battlefield, an eruption of magic that split the very air. Days passed. In the aftermath of Kira's death, an investigation began within the Byakuran organization. As the truth unraveled, countless hidden crimes were exposed. The world learned the full extent of what had been done to Makoto and Minori. The people, now aware of the torment the siblings had endured, turned on Byakuran. Their anger erupted into protests and condemnation. The once feared organization was now reviled. Its headquarters were sealed shut. Outside, crowds gathered, sharing what they knew. One man muttered that he had once been Tora's classmate, and that Tora had always been a rotten person. Another, a large muscular man, claimed Kengo would kill anyone he disliked, even his own comrades. A girl quietly confessed that she had once been embraced by Ishiki, but it had been the worst experience of her life. A bespectacled man added that Sajiri Aya was over 100 years old. Then a girl with a sword on her back murmured that Haruto Kira had always felt suspicious to her. It was finally revealed. Kira had not been entirely human. While voices of sympathy for the siblings rose, there remained whispers of uncertainty. Revenge had been served, but the crimes committed in its name would not be forgotten. And as for their whereabouts, far away from civilization, in a serene field blanketed with greenery, Makoto and Minori sat together on a hill beneath an endless blue sky. Peace finally surrounded them. Makoto looked up and remarked on how vast the sky was. He asked Minori what they should do next. Then, turning to her, he asked if there was anywhere she wanted to go. Minori thought for a moment. The idea of going somewhere, anywhere, with her brother felt strange after everything they had endured. She admitted she couldn't think of a place. She asked Makoto if he had anything in mind. He stood up, stretching slightly, and told her that he did. Curious, she asked him where. He replied with a gentle smile. The aquarium. Minori froze. Memories surged. The moment before they had been captured, when they had promised to visit the aquarium together. The memory returned in vivid clarity. She nodded softly. As she looked up, tears streamed from her eyes, not from pain, but from relief, from joy. Let's go, she whispered. Makoto reached out and held her hand, helping her to her feet. He admitted that beyond this moment, he hadn't really thought about what came next. Minori told him it was fine now. They had plenty of time ahead. Makoto looked into the distance and said that there had been times when it felt like fate would crush him entirely. But even so, if one keeps going sometimes, they're rewarded. The siblings turned toward each other, smiling gently. Let's start over, Makoto said. And with that, they walked hand in hand through the grassy field, the sunlight bathing them in warmth. Step by step, they followed a path that would lead them toward a new life. A new beginning.